Thank you, sir.
You may be seated.
Hello, jurors. Welcome back from lunch. We're starting some warmer weather out there, which is nice. Encourage you to get outside and get a little fresh air when you can. Although I guess that's what weekends are for. We remain in the midst of the state's case. Mr. Rucker, if you call the state's next witness, please.
Yes, sir. Your Honor, the state will call Dr. Susanne Hardy.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give to the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so you got it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you please state your name and spell it for the court and speak loudly, please? You may proceed.
Susanne Hardy, S-U-S-A-N-N-E, Hardy, H-A-R-D-Y.
Hello, doctor.
Hi.
And good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, counsel. And ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Let me get you to pull your chair a little closer to
Okay.
the microphone. That way, if you speak loud enough, hopefully we won't have to repeat your answers.
Okay.
Okay? I see you are ready to be really sufficiently hydrated.
Definitely.
And so let's get started. Could you introduce yourself to the jurors by telling them your name and how you are currently employed?
Okay, Susanne Hardy. I'm an emergency medicine physician at Emory Emergency Department on Clifton Road.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors how long have you worked as a physician there at the Emory Hospital on Clifton Road?
At the Emory campus, I'm in my 5th year, so around 5 years.
Okay. And you are a licensed medical doctor in the state of Georgia.
Correct.
And can you share with the jurors a little bit about your educational background and training that allows you to perform your duties there as a physician?
Okay. Went to Georgia Tech, got an industrial engineering degree and a master's in health systems. And then I went to Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, which is
You're going to have to slow down for me.
Oh, sorry.
Especially with the big words like
Yeah.
osteopathic,
Yeah.
that's slower. Philadelphia should probably
Yeah,
get.
figured that would feel like. Okay, so Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, the Georgia campus, so it was here. And then I went to Emory for residency and did emergency medicine residency. That was at Grady in Midtown and Emory, Maine on Clifton Road. And then now as an emergency medicine attending. And I'm actually credentialed at Grady, Midtown, and Emory Johns Creek and Emory, Maine.
Okay. Emory University Hospital has lots of different locations, different locales.
Yes,
Okay. You have worked at all of them?
yes,
Okay. There's one in Midtown.
yes,
Johns Creek, did you say?
yes.
And where, are there any others?
Well, Emory physicians work at Grady too.
At
So the
Grady,
same
too.
Emory emergency medicine works at Grady.
Okay. Did you say everybody at Emory works at Grady?
Not everybody, but yes, we are all credentialed.
Okay.
So we're all under Emory Emergency Medicine umbrella. So the people at Johns Creek are different though. But Emory, everyone at Midtown, Clifton campus, and Grady are all credentialed to work at all three.
Okay. You're a yellow jacket.
I am.
Okay. And how long have you been here in the Atlanta area?
I guess since 97,
Okay.
so 20 years.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, on or about September the 25th of 2016, were you working there at the emergency room that night?
Yes, I came on for a 10 p.m. shift.
Okay. And you came on at 10 p.m. on the 25th?
Yes.
When were you scheduled to get off?
They've switched our schedules around. I think it was 7 a.m., 6, 7 a.m.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, shortly after what time did you arrive at the hospital? That's probably a better question.
Probably 10 o'clock or 5 minutes, 5, 10 minutes before 10.
Okay. Do you live very far from the hospital?
20 minutes.
Okay. And generally speaking, what part of town?
Brookhaven.
Okay. And did something happen there in the emergency department shortly after 10, near 10:15, that really got you actively involved?
Yes.
Yeah. And can you tell the jurors, did you become aware that a patient suffering from a gunshot wound was being brought into the emergency room?
No, I did not know until I was in the room with the patient.
Okay. So tell me, what was it that drew your attention to go into the room in the first place?
I actually was just walking past that room to go to another patient's room, and I just happened to see those are critical care bays. And Dr. Schlar, who was on before, I took sign out from her, so she was supposed to be going home. So I saw that they just brought a new patient back to that room. And so then because it's a critical care bay and I was the new doctor coming on fresh, I walked into that room to say I would take care of it.
Okay. You know, Dr. Schlar had been on duty for a while before that.
Yes.
And she was scheduled to get off.
Yes.
And so you let her know that you would take over.
Yes.
Okay. And so can you kind of help the jurors understand what is the environment like in the critical care room when the patient is coming in, and what did you do?
There's a lot of resources that go in immediately when we have a critical care patient. So I think I was guessing there was about 6 nurses in the room, a couple techs that were trying to get IVs, put the patient on the monitor so we can get all her vital signs. I was in the room. I have a scribe that types for me that was in the room in the far corner. And then registration is coming in, trying to register so they're in our system so we can even order anything and get a chest x-ray, a head CT. You can't order anything unless they're in the system. And put a name band on.
Okay. And so those are all some of the kind of preliminary things that are going on, right?
Correct.
And can you describe for the jurors, how was the patient brought into the critical care room?
I didn't see her originally.
You didn't see her then?
Wheeled back. I only happened to walk past the room when she was already on the gurney.
Okay, I understand. The first time you ever laid eyes on the patient, she was already on the gurney.
Correct.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, is there a kind of hierarchy or a pecking order when situations like this arise with respect to kind of if somebody has to make a call about something to be done, does it fall down on one person?
Yes, it would be me.
It's you, right?
Yes.
Okay. So can you explain to the jurors what are some of the first things you did?
I guess the first thing is try to assess the situation, try to gather information of why she came in, what she was here for. Was there any history behind it that could help us? Anything surrounding the events? Was there anybody that brought her in that could tell us more detail? Not that we're leaving to go get that information, I'm just asking the nurses. And then we're assessing her to see if she's protecting her airway, if she's breathing, if I need to help breathe for her, if she's actually has a heartbeat. So we try to get vital signs, the heart rate, the blood pressure, and then try to expose the patient, and if we don't have any more information from them, to see if we can see any other injuries or try to determine, I guess, why they came in.
Okay. So upon your initial kind of observations and evaluations for Diane McIver, could you tell the jury, did she have the ability to speak when you initially saw her laying there on the gurney?
Initially, she was not speaking to me.
Okay. And would you say she had the ability to independently and with her own volition move her limbs or legs or anything? Do you have that recollection?
So when you say something like that to a physician, we think if they're not moving it more stroke-wise, but she was nothing, I mean, it was coordinated movements, but I remember nothing in particular that was making me think stroke immediately, but she needed help to do everything. So she wasn't walking around or moving like you or I would be sitting here.
Okay. And so one of the things you told the jurors is that you really want to get a sense of kind of what happened, and you have a recollection of kind of tasking some nurses to try to find out like what happened.
Yes.
And kind of makes sense because you really want to get a fair assessment of what you're dealing with, right?
Yes.
You have any specific recollections of any nurses in particular that you would have said, hey, can you go find out what happened?
No.
Okay. And by finding out what happened, in your mind, would that require the nurses to perhaps speak with the people who were at the scene or with the victim at the time that she incurred the injury?
Well, once I heard it was a GSW, there wasn't need for me to send a nurse out. I needed my nurses there.
Okay. And so initially, did you know it was a GSW?
Not initially when I walked in the room.
Right. And by GSW, we meaning?
Sorry, gunshot wound.
Gunshot wound. Okay. So upon looking at Diane McIver, was she face up on the gurney or face down?
Face up.
Okay. Was she clothed?
Yes.
Okay. So did you perform an external examination of her body?
Yes, well, then we removed her clothes and did a more thorough exam.
Okay. How did you remove her clothes?
I think the nurses did trauma shears and cut them off.
You used trauma shears, real sharp scissors, and just cut off her clothes?
Yes.
Okay. And so, can you tell the jury, she's laying on the gurney, she's face up. Could you see any external injuries to the front of her body?
Once we exposed her chest, I was able to see a small wound in her left upper quadrant, which is, I guess, the upper part of her abdomen on the left side.
Okay. And what did that injury appear to be?
It appeared like a gunshot wound.
Okay. Consistent with you knew?
Consistent with.
Okay. So, can you give the jurors just some idea about some of the life-saving measures that you either took directly yourself or directed to be taken during those initial phases now that we have her clothing removed?
So the initial phases, you worry that they're bleeding in their abdomen or bleeding somewhere in their chest. So the first thing you're doing is listening if there's breath sounds on either side of her chest, because sometimes it could have basically what we call dropped a lung. If you get anything that hit the lung, then it collapses and cause pressure on the heart. So you're making sure that there's nothing you need to do there, which I have good breath sounds on both sides. You're doing a fast exam, which is a ultrasound like they do on babies, but we do to look in the abdomen to see if we see any fluid, look around the heart. And at the same time, even prior to this, the nurses are getting as many IVs as they possibly can. We call them large bore IVs, which is the biggest IV they can get, so we can bring a bunch of fluids in. They're ordering uncross-matched blood to be able to start giving her a lot of blood products, since that's what she's losing. Those are the first ones we did.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, during that time frame and in the minutes thereafter, did you become concerned about a particular aspect of her condition?
I'm not sure what you're
Strike that and ask you that question. How was her blood pressure?
We had a hard time getting her blood pressure. They usually try first with the manual cuff, so you can just push the button and it'll go. But if we can't get that super quickly, then we'll try to do the other one's an automated. A manual one is the one where you could personally do it, and then you put your stethoscope up and you can see it go and be able to tell it there, not by the numbers that pop up on the screen. So we didn't get a blood pressure immediately. I think we probably had the 2 IVs before we even got a first blood pressure reading on her.
Okay. And so can you tell the jurors, after the IVs and the fluids, did her condition begin to improve a little?
Yes, that's when she started to talk to me.
That's when she started to talk to you. Okay. So can you tell the jurors, at the time that we were able to get some fluids into Diane McIver and she's about to start talking to us, how long has she been in the emergency room at that time?
I tried to be able to tell this by the notes, but it's really hard because every documentation, when you're in a critical patient, no one's documenting right at that moment. So everything is guessing or guesstimate of what happened at what time. So I think the best I could possibly get from my notes when she started talking might have been, I think I had 12 minutes.
Okay, at 12 minutes after she arrived in the ER?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, yeah, if you take a couple minutes from her coming into ballet, so when she got into the room.
Okay. Okay, I understand. And the notes that you're referring to prior to your testimony here today, we provided you with a copy of the medical records for Diane McIver.
Yes.
And you had an opportunity to review those.
Yes.
And in connection with your review of those things, did I ask you to do something in preparation for your testimony here today?
Yes, you asked me to create a timeline as best I could.
To create a timeline as best you could, right?
Yes.
And you think by doing, first of all, did you do it?
Yes.
Okay. And go ahead.
I can multitask.
I bet you can. Okay. So in creating that timeline, do you think from time to time, if you need to, use it to refresh your memory about specific times when significant events occurred, you would be able to do that?
Yes.
Using your timeline. Okay. And that's fine. But Judge understanding the rule, I would like to show it to Mr. Samuel.
Sure.
First, all right, so you can just take a look at it. Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors, 12 minutes or so after she's been in the critical care room, and she is about to start speaking, how many other people, as best you can recall, were in the room at that time?
I would have said about the same, but I have no specific recollection. I mean, I would guess between 4 to 6 nurses and techs around me. There was at least one other doctor, if not 2 at the time, helping me. Scribe still in the corner.
Okay.
So I'm clear, when you say techs, that's T-E-C-H-S.
Technicians,
Technicians,
yes.
not techs as in the defendant in this case. He was not in it.
Correct. No, he was not.
Okay. So we've got several technicians, we got nurses. So what is going on? How is the activity in the room at that time?
It was pretty controlled. Everyone has their own job.
Right. To an observer standing outside of the room, does it kind of look like a controlled ballet, or is it scrambled? What does it look like?
We joke it's a controlled chaos.
Right. How about noise in the room? Is it particularly noisy?
Not particularly so that I remember.
Okay. And so when Diane McIver began to speak, you were able to hear her based on where you were positioned.
Correct.
Okay. And if you need to refer to the medical records, I'll just put them here for you. They've been marked and entered the evidence in stage 241.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you tell the jurors, did you say something to Diane McIver when she began to speak, or did she just speak on her own?
She probably spoke on her own. I don't remember specifics of what she said to make me start asking her questions.
Okay. But you do remember asking her questions?
Yes.
Can you tell the jurors what question did you ask Diane McIver?
Once you know it's a trauma, you kind of go down a pathway. So the first question was just any medical history, and then any surgical history. I don't know if I asked for allergies or not, but that's one of the next ones we ask about. And then, I guess at the same time, then we were rolling her, so we were trying to determine any more of her wounds. So that's when I saw the other gunshot wound on her back and asked her, did you hear a gun? Or I asked her where the gun was held. And she said, I was holding it behind my back. Do you want me to continue?
Hold on one second. The question you asked was what?
Where was the gun held? In a trauma, you cannot determine the exit or entrance wounds. And so just by asking that question, you could determine where the entrance was.
Okay. Because you were trying to find out where the bullet went in.
Yes.
Okay. And her response was what?
I was holding it behind my back.
And when she said that to you, can you tell the jurors what did you say back to her?
Well, it just seemed odd that you could be holding a gun behind your back, so I just repeated it with you were holding it behind your back?
That's what you said back to her?
Yes.
And then what did she say?
She said, no, he was holding it behind my back. Can you describe?
I do need a scribe, don't I?
I didn't hear the last thing.
No, he was holding it behind my back.
And then, oh, he's your scribe.
I said he
Yes.
needs a scribe. Sorry.
Got it.
And then can you tell the jurors what did you say next?
I asked her how many shots she heard.
And what did she say?
1.
What did you ask her next?
I don't think I asked a follow-up question right then.
Okay. And so this conversation with Diane McIver, can you tell the jurors, you were looking at her.
Yes.
Were you close to her?
Yes.
And you were trying to get information so that you could better take care of her.
Yes.
And when you rolled her over on her side, you could see the other wound to her back.
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors kind of what was the state of her medical condition at this time?
She seemed just sleepy to me, tired, somnolent. Most of the time I remember her eyes closed, just talking in a quiet voice.
Okay. And when she was responding to your questions, can you tell the jurors, was she yelling or screaming, or was it like a whisper? You tell us how loudly she was speaking.
It seemed quiet, but enough that I was right by her head that I could understand and hear her.
Okay. And you have no doubt in your mind that these are the things that went on between yourself and Diane McIver.
That's the truth as I know it.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors, at a certain point, did her condition start to worsen?
Worsen in terms of?
Strike that. Let me ask you a better question.
Okay.
Was there a time when Diane McIver said other things to you after this?
That's when she said it was an accident.
Okay. And tell the jurors this. Was that in response to a question that you asked her?
No.
And when she said it was an accident, can you give the jurors some context about how long did she say that after the last question that you had asked her about how many shots did you hear, and she said one. How much time goes by before she just says it was an accident?
I don't remember specifics, but I feel like it was a pause, so I don't know if it was 30 seconds, a minute, and then she said it.
Do you have any recollection of saying anything to Diane McIver about not judging her or anything like that? Do you have any recollection of saying anything like that?
No specific recollection.
Okay. Did there come a point in time when, in the treatment of Diane McIver, you made the decision to intubate her or put a tube down her throat?
Yes.
And at what point in time, in context to this conversation, did you make the decision to intubate Diane McIver?
I think, based on the timeline, when if I'm saying she started talking around 22:32.
And for regular folks, that's 10:32?
Yes.
Okay.
I intubated her at 10:45. So I would say a couple minutes before that.
Your recollection is that this conversation would have happened about 10:32.
After 10:32.
After 10:32. And then the intubation would have been at what time?
So at 10:45 is when they gave her the sedation medication. So the start of an intubation.
That's at 10:45.
Yes.
Now, in between the time she first came into the critical care room until 10:45, can you tell the jurors whether or not any anesthetic, any drugs, or any medication was given to Diane McIver at all?
Besides fluids and packed red blood cells, she didn't receive any medication until I went to intubate her.
And that would have been around 10:45.
Yes.
And so the medication that she would have received by way of any anesthetic or anything that might alter her perception was after she made these statements to you.
Yes.
Now, a couple of minutes before 10:45 in your decision to intubate her, which, by the way, why did you make that decision to do that?
Her abdomen was getting more distended.
Say that one more time.
Her abdomen was getting more distended.
Her abdomen was getting more distended,
Yes.
meaning,
She was losing more blood in her abdomen.
okay. And the intubation was designed to do what?
To prepare her for possibly going to an OR.
Okay,
To protect her airway if her blood pressure dropped so low she wasn't breathing for herself.
okay. And her blood pressure continued to remain low up until that time, correct?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury, had you given Diane McIver an anesthetic or any drugs, what effect would that have had on her blood pressure?
The ones we give, not much.
Okay. So, before you actually gave her the meds and you intubated her by putting the tube down her throat, did you ask her another question?
Yes.
Okay. What question did you ask her?
There's two questions. First question, I told her I was going to intubate her, and I asked her if it was okay.
What did she say?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
She was very polite.
She's very polite. What was the second question that you asked her?
Would you like to see your husband?
And can you tell the jurors, did she give you an answer?
Yes, she gave me an answer.
Can you tell them what the answer was?
No.
Now, during this time that you were with Diane McIver there in the emergency room, did you hear her at any point in time make any comments or statements about the fact that she was dying?
Yes, I have no specific time frame I could tell you, but I do recall that she said that in different phrases.
What were some of the phrases that you recall her
I
saying
don't
that?
remember specifics.
You don't remember specifics. What was it? What was your impression about what she was saying when she was mentioning the word dying?
I'm not sure what you mean by impression. Patients.
What did you think she was talking about?
I think she felt like she was dying.
She felt like she was dying, right?
Yes.
That's the impression you got.
Yes.
And she said that to you at various points in time when you were with her, correct?
It wasn't specifically to me.
Okay, she just would say it.
Yes.
Okay. And let me ask you this. Did she say it before you ever asked her the question, would you like to see your husband? Do you recall her saying that?
Yes, because after I said that, then we intubated her. I don't think she spoke after that.
So, Dr. Hardy, prior to your testimony here this afternoon, did I show you a large demonstrative object that is actually right outside the courtroom, outside these doors?
Yes.
And did I ask you to take a look at it to determine whether or not it was a fair and accurate representation of what it was supposed to be?
Yes.
And is it?
Yes.
And did I ask you whether or not you could use that demonstrative device if we could bring it here in the courtroom so that you could show the jurors exactly where Diane McIver was positioned, where you were positioned at the time that she made those statements and you asked her that question.
Yes.
And could you?
Yes.
You could kind of show the jurors how close you were to her when you heard her say that.
Correct.
Okay. And so could you tell the judge what is the demonstrative device?
Stretcher.
Okay. And I also provided you with a mannequin, correct?
Correct.
So that you could position the mannequin in the same position that Diane McIver would have been in on this night when you had this conversation with her and you asked her that question, right?
Yes, there's a mannequin on the stretcher.
This mannequin on the stretcher. Okay. At this time, Your Honor, I'm going to ask the court for permission to publish this demonstrative device. It is, I'll state in my place, it's a gurney brought from Emory University Hospital. It is not the actual gurney, but it is one that is exactly like it, and has a mannequin that is nondescript. And the witness has said that she can use these two items in order to demonstrate for the jurors exactly what she saw and what she heard on the night of this incident. And I would ask the court for permission to be able to do it.
Susanne, who your witness?
Our witness?
This is the witness you're working with Dr. Hardy when it comes to time for cross-examination?
Yeah.
Great. I didn't ask that well. Any objection to what the state has requested? Okay. I'll allow it.
Thank you, Judge. I need like 30 seconds.
Part of the Red Sea there to get this through.
Okay. Let me see. I'm gonna let Dr. Hardy, you come down and help us. And as long as you keep your voice up, I'm sure the judge will let you testify from your feet. Okay.
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 Do you want me to stand more where everyone can see from that side or this side?
Yes, that'd be fine. Yeah. Yeah. Wherever makes you
Yeah, the
comfortable.
orientation should be for jurors, not in any other direction. So whatever you think is most instructive for you interacting with the jurors, we'll orient it that way.
Okay.
Where do you want it?
This way.
This way.
Head this way.
Head this way. Like that?
Yes.
Is that good? Okay. First of all, just help orient us. Is the sheet a factor in what you did that night?
Yes, the sheet was placed over her for privacy when we were able to.
Okay. And so if you could help orient the jurors, and if you could just tell them kind of what we're looking at and why we have the mannequin positioned this way. Let's start there first.
Okay. This stretcher is how you can take care of a patient and evaluate them. It's close where you can hook up to IV poles right here that can come up, and you can adjust them as needed to bring the bed up, down.
Okay. And Ms. Convery, would you do me a huge favor? Could you bring us into the critical care room on our video?
Did you borrow the gurney or acquire the gurney?
I had to sign away one of my children to get the gurney. No, just kidding. No, we borrowed it, Judge.
Okay.
Okay. Now, you recognize that?
Yes,
Dr. Hardy? How do you recognize that?
that's trauma room 2.
That's trauma room 2. Okay. So take the jurors through kind of why we have the mannequin positioned this way, and if you could take us through the conversation and let the jurors know where you would have been standing relative to where Ms. McIver was.
So the way the gurney is set up now, stretcher is set up now, you guys are back on this side, on the right side. Most of my time with her was all spent near the head of the bed. I think I traveled a little bit to evaluate when I listened to her lungs to hear or feel pulses, but I mainly stayed right here at the head of the bed. And I think when I did a central line, I went to this side. But most of the time would be a foot around her. Besides, one other time I went back to get intubation equipment and had to step. So right back this side, so not that far away here.
Okay. And the nurses who were working and assisting you, where would they have been approximately?
Surrounding the rest of the body.
Okay. And so, fair to say that if we've got nurses who are down in this area or down in this area, like, do you know Mary Wyndham?
Yes.
Okay, Mary was there that night, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, and nurses who are over in this area, they are farther away from Diane McIver's mouth than you are.
Yes.
Okay. And so, can you tell the jurors, do you have any specific recollection of where you were when she began to speak?
No specific, besides somewhere in this vicinity.
Okay. And for the record, the court reporter, how far would you say you are from her head?
What?
A foot. Can you show the jurors how you rolled Diane McIver over so that you could determine if there was a wound in her back?
Rolling is not a single person jump.
Okay. I'll help you. You tell me what to do.
Because you still have to keep the patient's spinal precaution. So I was the one at her head keeping her cervical spine straight in line. So then I had nurses over here.
Nurses over here?
Well, probably
Two. And I get two nurses
just to do it correctly.
over here. Okay.
And then you'll cross the patient's arms over their chest. If it bends.
Mm-hmm.
Without
Okay,
breaking
then.
the patient's arm. Or taking off.
There's a malpractice.
There you go. So you have to be on the So you're on the same side. And basically, what you're trying to do is keep the whole spine in one line as you roll. So you're standing on that side, you're going to wrap your arms over both arms. So one arm, both arms this way. Same thing, protecting, and then you're the same thing with the legs. And then I'm standing right here, holding her neck as we roll her. So I say 1, 2, 3, and then we all roll at the same time. And that keeps the spine straight. We're protecting it.
Okay.
So, like this.
And in doing that, her back is exposed and you were able to see the injury back here.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. And after you did that, did you do anything to this wound back here on her back?
No.
No. You just rolled it back over.
Correct.
Okay. Just roll it back over.
We felt her spine, but we didn't touch the wound.
Okay.
Besides, just know that it's there.
Okay. Thank you, nurses. Let me show you a photograph. You were kind enough to meet with me out at Emory University Hospital last year.
Yes.
And while there, I was able to show you some photographs, and I actually had you initial them, didn't I?
Yes.
I want to show you one of the photographs. It states exhibit number 261. Is there any objection?
Can she sit back down, or you want her near the gurney still?
I'm going to publish it, and so I would like for her to stay near the gurney.
That's fine. I just want to be mindful of seating her as soon as you can. But
I will.
Great.
Yes, sir. I would tender state exhibit 261 in the evidence at this time, Your Honor.
There's no objection. It's admitted.
Am I free to publish, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Are those your initials?
Yes, they are.
This was one of the photographs I showed you last year.
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors in this photograph, are we able to see?
Yes, it's rolling the opposite way that I roll. But yes. The wound?
Yes. And I've got a little pointer here. Could you just point it out on the screen?
No.
Okay. And was it close to where her spine is, actually?
Yes, you can see. I think the spinal groove is right down here. But it's hard to tell from that angle
Okay.
when you roll
Okay.
out there.
Okay. Okay. And so we have these statements that we know were made. Did your position change from being kind of in this area to any other areas when you would have heard any of these other statements?
No.
Okay. And so can you tell the jurors there was still work going on at the same time that these statements were being made?
Yes.
And when we get to the question, would you like to see your husband? Where were you when you asked that question?
Standing right behind her head.
Okay. And so you were in a position to hear her say what?
No.
No. I think now you can take your seat.
It's right where?
Thank you. In 1 second. I want to show you a second photograph. It's been marked as State's Exhibit number 262. Is there any objection?
Admitted.
Do you see that in that corner?
Yes.
Are those your initials?
Yep, upside down.
Upside down. Okay. And in this photograph, can you tell the jurors what do we see in this photograph?
Miss McIver with an ET tube, an endotracheal tube in her mouth. And then the part that goes around her mouth just holds the ET tube in place. The other tube coming out is an NG tube, and it takes the suction of blood from your abdomen or from your stomach. And we get that out in case people aspirate once you intubate them. You don't want stomach contents coming up and going into their lungs.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors how long, well, strike that, let me ask you a better question. Was Diane McIver intubated in the critical care room
Yes.
by you?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors, after you intubated her, is that when you began, or around that time, is that when she received the medicines?
She received the medicine right before I intubated her.
Right before. And so can you tell the jurors, did her condition really go down after that?
Not immediately, but yes.
And what happened?
Her heart stopped beating, and she went into cardiac arrest.
And in reviewing the medical records and creating a timeline, can you give the jurors some idea about what time that occurred?
Around 5 minutes after intubation.
And intubation was about 10:45.
Yes. Started at 10:45.
We can keep the exhibit here for the rest of the day.
Probably not the rest of the day. How much longer are we going to have it there?
I was just trying to get to a natural transition point to interrupt and get everybody to take it out. If you instruct me to do it now, I'll just stop and do it now.
Well, you can keep asking, and they can move the desk and roll it out.
Okay. Can you tell the jurors, at 10:50 when she went into cardiac arrest, what did you do in response to that?
Me personally, or as a team?
Or as a team?
We did a thoracotomy and opened her chest.
Okay. And suffice it to say, she did not speak again after making that last response, no.
No,
Okay.
not that I recall.
any time during her conversation with you or speaking to you, did she ever relate to you that the accident occurred as a result of the gun going off while hitting a bump?
No.
Did she ever tell you anything about the person who actually had the gun behind her, being asleep?
No.
Your Honor, she said what was said. When I asked these questions, we tend to get, you've already got an answer. These are the three things she said. We asked her for an hour and a half, all the things that were not said.
Okay, well, actually, I think you've come in at just about the right time, because you usually ask 2 or 3, well, did this happen? And then there's an objection, and so there were 2. So now we'll go to something else.
Did Diane McIver go to the operating room?
Yes.
And can you give the jurors some idea of the length of time she was in the critical care room before she went to the operating room? How much time was she in the critical care room?
I think it was around 30 to 40 minutes.
30 to 40 minutes. And can I ask you, in some of our conversations and when you were kind enough to meet with me last year at the hospital, do you have an opinion of her treatment had she been taken to, say, Grady Memorial Hospital immediately?
No.
Okay. First, let me ask you this. During the treatment of Diane McIver, were steps taken to transfer her to Grady?
Yes.
And explain why or how that was done.
Grady is a level 1 trauma center. To be a level 1 trauma center, you have trauma surgeons on call in the house, along with other specialists and specialties, or an immediate access to all specialties.
Okay. And so, did you actually have the opportunity to talk to Dr. Subramanian over at Grady?
I had my team call, and Dr. Abramoff was in the room, and she took the call
Okay.
and discussed it with
Okay.
Dr. Subramanian,
Who is Dr. Subramanian?
the trauma attending on at Grady.
Okay. And so, did you understand that if you were able to stabilize Diane McIver, the plan was to transfer her to Grady?
Yes.
I thought I had my sections all laid out. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Let me show you a copy of a transcript of our conversation at Emory.
Okay.
All right, and I'm going to direct you to page 31. And if you would start at line 1.
Stop.
I was down and asked her.
Okay.
Did you participate in any of the life-saving measures that took place in the operating room?
No.
Do you know who Dr. Marty Sellers is?
Yes.
Who is he?
He's an Emory transplant surgeon.
Okay. Do you know whether or not Dr. Sellers actually helped with the surgery on Diane McIver? Do you know that?
Yes.
Okay. He did?
I wasn't personally there, but yes.
Okay. I mean, you know it from reading the records, right?
Yes.
Okay. And did you become aware that Diane McIver did not survive her injuries?
That night?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And I want to ask you, did you, during the course of your time there in the ER, have the opportunity to actually encounter the defendant in this case, Mr. McIver?
Yes, after Miss McIver went to the OR.
After she went to the OR?
Yes.
And can you describe for the jurors, how did that happen and where did it happen?
In the waiting room. He was waiting in the waiting room, and I went to go update him on her status.
Okay. And was he alone, or was he were there other people there with him?
He was with the gentleman he described to me as his rock,
Okay.
and then he described the female with him as Miss McIver's best friend, that she came in the room after I walked in.
She came in the room after you walked in?
Yes.
Okay. Did you know that the person that he just, well, let me ask you a better question. Did you know the occupation of the person that he described as his rock?
I think he did mention lawyer at some point.
Okay. And I'm showing you State's Exhibit number 257. Is that the person that walked into the room after you got there?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, what did you say, if anything, to Mr. McIver?
I updated him on her status, that she was in critical condition, that we were able to stabilize her originally, and then she was losing too much blood, and I had to intubate her to breathe for her. And then she coded into cardiac arrest, and we had to open her chest. And then she was able to regain cardiac activity after we opened her chest, and that she was currently in the OR with the surgeons.
Okay. You said that to him?
Yes.
Okay. And as you sit here today, did you make any personal observations about his demeanor?
No.
Okay. Did he say anything back to you?
He was very polite to me.
What did he say?
He said, "Thank you. We appreciate your care."
Okay. Did he kind of say it like that?
I don't remember specifically.
Okay.
He was calm, collected.
He was calm and collected. Okay. Did you see any tears?
No.
How long do you believe you remained in the waiting room area there delivering this news to Mr. McIver?
Maybe 5 minutes.
And what did you do after that?
Walked back out to assess the status of my ER.
Okay. And you found out sometime later that Diane McIver didn't survive.
Yes.
And did you ever see Mr. McIver in the emergency room department at all after that?
I never personally saw him.
Okay. You described to the jurors that during this activity there was a scribe kind of taking things down.
Yes.
Could you show the jurors on that photograph where was the scribe sitting, if you can? Is it visible there?
Not
Do I
quite.
rotate it some more?
It's by the front door. So way back in this corner. But even behind the. No, sorry. So the door is probably a little further right here. So back where the trash can is where my scribe is standing. When you walk in the room, immediately on that left corner, they try to stay as far out of the way as they possibly can. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So the scribe was really much further away from Diane McIver's mouth than you were.
Yes.
Okay. And so the purpose of the scribe is what?
To document for us along the way, so we can pay more attention to the patient and have direct eye contact.
Okay. So what kinds of things does the scribe take down? Do they just independently take stuff down, or do they take stuff down in your direction?
In the beginning, they're independently taking down the information. Usually in a non-trauma case, it's just questions I'm asking, so they're taking down information and all the answers that I've asked.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, with respect to the medical records in this case, do you find any of the statements or the questions that you asked Diane McIver, were they taken down by the scribe?
No.
Okay. But a couple of days after this incident, you were contacted by Detective Darren Smith with the Atlanta Police Department.
Yes.
He actually had the opportunity to interview you.
Yes.
And this was a couple of days after the event.
Yeah, I felt like it was in the first week.
Okay. And fair to say that your memory and your recollections would have been pretty fresh at that time.
Okay. Yes.
That's fair, right?
Yes.
Okay. And when you talked to Detective Smith, did you tell him actually, what you told this jury this afternoon.
I feel so.
Stop.
It's not important, but that's hearsay. What she told the policeman the same as she said here today is hearsay. So I object.
Oh, okay. He's made the objection.
Okay, I'll rephrase the answer to the question.
Okay.
All right, let me just ask.
Don't rephrase it because you're not achieve a non-hearsay result.
Well, if rephrasing means something similar, I'll sustain the objection. If rephrasing is we're going in a different direction, then we're going in a different direction.
When you talked to Detective Smith, did he ask you questions about what occurred in the critical care room?
I believe so.
Did he ask you questions about what Diane McIver may have said in the critical care room?
Yes.
And did you respond to the questions that he asked you?
Yes.
It's not critically important, but I don't understand why we're asking what she told someone else when she just answered under oath all the questions to the jury.
Okay. I agree. But so far, these questions have skirted the hearsay issue.
I object to relevance. What she told the policeman a year and a half ago.
Well, I'm anticipating a thorough and sifting cross-examination.
But then it may be on redirect
Okay.
that this is a place to explore.
All right. Let's see. Oh, I asked you, strike that. Do you know what happened to the shirt of Diane McIver that might have had the entry and exit holes in it that was cut from her body the night of the life-saving measures?
I do not know what happened to the shirt.
Okay. Dr. Hardy, thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's all my questions.
Mr. Singh?
Here comes the thorough and sifting cross-examination, Dr. Hardy. You were nice enough to meet with me 2 weeks ago,
Yes.
and a couple of other people from our side over here,
Yes.
over at Emory, correct?
Yes.
And we met with you and talked to you essentially the same things we've been talking about here today, correct?
Correct.
You have training as an ER doctor, which includes getting trained at various other medical facilities, is that correct?
Yes.
And I know I asked you this before, but I don't remember the answer. The difference between a resident and attending and all that. Give us a quick 1 minute.
Once you graduate med school,
Yeah.
after 4 years, then you are considered a resident and you're a training doctor. So you're already considered a doctor, but you're in training.
Okay.
And then once you graduate residency, then you can apply for your boards, take your boards to be a board certified physician in your specialty.
So what are you now?
Emergency medicine certified, board certified.
Okay. What were you in September of
Same in attending.
2016? And there were other doctors there. Dr. Abramoff was with you there, correct?
Yes.
Dr. Celine
Shalar.
Schlar was there with you, correct?
Yes.
There was another doctor with you in the ER, correct?
They came on later, Dr.
With you in room 2 during that 45-minute period. Weren't there more than 3 of you?
Later, at the very end, Dr. Rosen came in, but it was at the very end because his shift did not start till 11.
Okay. And then when she goes to OR, she's with surgeons upstairs, correct?
Yes. There were surgeons down in the room. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Not emergency medicine trained. So there was a general surgery, a third-year surgery resident in the room that came in that just happened to be seeing another patient in the ER.
And what was his or her name?
I have it right here because I don't see him that often. I haven't seen him in a while.
Okay. It's not critically important, but there was a surgeon.
Razavi.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he or she?
He.
Actually participated in the Law&Crime, correct?
Yes, but it was mainly the chief resident, Dr. Syed, who was there for that.
And as I understand it, the total amount of time we're in ER2, according to your notes and according to the records and according to your memory, all three are more or less consistent, is about 45 minutes. Somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes. Is that
Yes.
right? I think when you met with us, you said 30. Today you said 45. But
Yeah,
You don't
in my
have to
head it
stop.
was 30. When I looked through notes, there's different times that are written down, so that's It's all an estimate.
You told us you didn't have a stopwatch, I understand. She arrives at the hospital sometime in the neighborhood of 10:20, correct?
Correct.
Into the ER at 10:20.
Yes.
At the valet at 10:15.
Okay.
Right.
That would have been, the timestamp of the valet was the best timestamp
Yeah, well.
possible.
Okay. And then she's upstairs by 11:03 on
Yes.
the third floor.
Yes.
So that's how we get the 45-minute time frame. I just want to ask you a little bit about the things that were said. I think you've explained all the medical procedures you did. You did everything you could, right?
Yes.
I mean, even looking back in hindsight, you all did everything you could, right?
Yes.
Okay. When her blood pressure is low, she is, the words I think you used were somnolent, correct?
Yes. Sleepy. Somnolent.
Okay. But coherent.
Correct.
Okay. So even though she is kind of sleepy and then the eyes open and closed, there's no question that she's coherent. She's not, if you said, what color is the sky, she wouldn't have told you something about a car, right?
And she was answering questions appropriately for me.
She was responsive to your questions, right?
Yes.
Okay. There was some confusion when you asked her, as I understand it, where was the gun, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You testified at the grand jury in this case, actually. You remember that?
Yes.
Downstairs?
Ups.
Upstairs. Thank you.
I think so.
And you said the gist of it was something like she was holding the gun, and you were confused by that and said, you were holding the gun? She said, no, he was holding the gun, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So either she didn't understand your question, or you didn't understand her answer, but that got straightened out.
Yes.
Correct? And in the end, it was clear that she was saying he had the gun, correct?
Yes.
And then she told you it was an accident.
Yes.
She said there was a pause, but it was all part of this conversation. It was an accident.
Yes.
Here I'm going to do what Mr. Rucker did, what I did 3. She didn't say we were having an argument, right?
Correct.
She didn't say we were having a fight, correct?
Correct.
Okay, one more.
If there's no objection, I'll give you one more.
It's Friday, Judge.
Oh, so I'm down to 2 because it's Friday. But the point was, she said it was an accident. She wasn't under any duress when she said it.
No.
You didn't try to steer her in one direction or another to get her to say something.
No.
In her coherent state, she said it was an accident.
Yes.
Okay. You didn't mention, I think I'm correct, that she ever expressed that she was in pain. Do you recall her saying that her stomach hurt?
Later on, as it got more distended, but in the beginning, she was not in any pain.
Just the chronology, as Mr. Described, putting on the chart, described as the person who takes dictation in the operating room, right? And the ER.
Yes.
Okay, so that's Mr. Rucker's new role. When you were writing that down, when he was writing that down, you were doing it in the correct chronological order, right?
I felt so.
Okay. Where is it that she starts saying, my stomach hurts?
It was after, I guess, before this page, before I said I was going to intubate her.
Okay.
But I do not remember a specific time frame.
We're talking about a grand total of 45 minutes, so
Sometime between 4 and 5, after it was an accident, before intubation.
okay. So she says it's an accident, and then she says my stomach is hurting,
Yes.
and she doesn't have any painkillers at that point, right?
No.
Or sedatives or anything, right? You can't do that because of the impact it could have on her injuries, correct?
Correct.
And does she repeat that more than once, that she's in pain?
I think so.
Okay. And it's clear to you you're going to need to do a lot more, correct?
Yes.
Someone, Dr. Abramoff, is talking to the folks at Grady, correct?
She did in the very beginning, yes.
Huh?
She did in the very beginning.
Okay. And then it turns out that there were surgeons there that night at Emory, correct?
Yes.
So you decided we're going to go up to the OR at this point,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay. And at this point, needless to say, she has no clothes on, correct? You've sheared all of her clothes off.
I believe so.
She knows that, correct?
Yes.
There are IVs going in and out of her various places, correct?
Yes.
What's a main line?
Central line is a
Central.
line to a large vessel. So the jugular, interjugular in the neck, subclavian under the clavicle, or in the femoral, right at your groin.
And was there a, I say main line, that's Philadelphia, but what do you call it?
Central line.
Central line. Was that attached?
Yes, I had a central line in right subclavian.
All of this is going on in the ER, correct?
Yes.
It's not like you're having a conversation in a chapel. Do you want to come see your husband? You want your husband to come see you, right?
Right.
That's not what's going on. All right. And then you tell her we're going to intubate you, correct?
Correct.
And does she understand what that? Well, did you tell her what that meant?
I don't remember specifically, but I usually do.
Okay. And she said yes, please.
Yes.
Now we're talking about putting a tube down her throat. We saw the picture, correct?
Yes.
And we don't even need to know the medical reason again, but that's even more invasive, correct? You're telling her this is what I'm going to do. She's, yes?
Yes.
She says, okay, right?
Yes.
She's in pain, right?
Yes.
Does she know she's going up to the OR at that point?
I never specifically told her that.
Okay. You say that she mentioned a couple times, am I dying, or I am dying, or something like that, correct?
Yes.
But you reassured her, correct?
Yes.
You don't say to someone, yeah, you're dying. You don't say that, right?
No.
You say things like, we're going to do everything we can for you, honey, correct?
You're in the right place.
You're in the right place. It's the best place for you. We're going to take care of you. I'm not trying to use quotes here, but it's that kind of thing,
Yes.
correct? And it's in the midst of all of this, and towards the end of all of that conversation, you say to her, do you want to see your husband, right?
Yes.
And she says no.
Yes.
And then you give her the sedatives and you do the intubation. She's out then, right? And
Yes.
She's under the...
Yes. She's paralyzed and
She's
sedated.
paralyzed at that point.
And sedated.
And up to the OR she goes.
Yes.
You went out and you saw Mr. McIver, correct?
Correct.
He was calm.
Yes.
You didn't make note of his demeanor being outrageous in any way, correct?
No.
Okay. It is not outside of your experience that a patient may not want to see a loved one when they're in great pain, correct?
Correct.
It is not outside your experience that a patient may not want to see a parent, a spouse, a child with tubes coming in and out of them when they've been, all their clothes are off and they're in pain. Is that right?
Correct.
You don't know what she knew, but you had told her, we're going to take care of you, correct?
Yes.
And she was in pain and wanted to be taken care of, right?
Yes.
And I know it probably goes without saying, but I'm going to have to ask you anyways. People, everybody, every patient in an ER is different, right?
Yes.
Every spouse of a patient in an ER is different, right?
Yes.
Okay? We can generalize all we want, but we'll be wrong 99.9% of the time because everybody's different, right?
Right.
And let's talk about Mr. McIver first. The fact that he's not writhing on the ground, crying and screaming, doesn't make him unlike.
I'm going to object.
The fact that he is.
Hold on. Tell me your objection. Okay. Because we're already getting a response to your
Yeah, I know we are. Yes. The objection is, I think we're getting into an area that the court kind of instructed us that we couldn't go into, and that is kind of perceptions and opinions.
Okay.
for witnesses.
So why don't you finish your question? But I'm mindful of the concern. I think you are too, because we actually just had a conversation about something akin to it.
Yeah.
State your full question.
Can I ask you just a question?
Okay. I'm not an oath, but you can.
My understanding was we can ask observations, even past observations, but not opinions.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I think that's what I was doing.
Okay, but I appreciate the objection because I could have
Let
seen
me get a
that.
question.
I'll go slow enough that you feel free to object, and I'll
Okay,
stay
well,
within-
Mr. Rucker, I'll manage this one. You've teed it up, so if I think there's an issue, you don't need to object
Okay.
to this question.
Some people cry, some people don't cry.
Yes.
These next few questions. Cool.
It may depend on whether the person is had a long illness that's coming to an end, right?
Right?
That situation could lead someone to be relieved even, a
Yes.
survivor, right?
Yes.
A child versus an adult versus a parent versus a spouse. Everybody reacts differently to grief, right?
Yes.
Is that correct? And you've been in the ER for how long?
8 years?
A lot of people have died in the ER?
Yes.
You've seen a lot of spouses, parents, children who are the survivors of someone who dies?
Yes.
Okay. And they're all different, right?
Right.
And when it comes to the patient wanting to see a loved one as they're, again, in pain, about to be intubated and all that, clothes off, you can't generalize about that either, can you? About what they want or what they're thinking when they respond to a question like that, correct?
Yes, is my opinion, no.
Huh? Don't worry about
Isn't
the
that kind of an
judge. Judge will
opinion?
interrupt if we're getting into opinion.
Politely.
Huh? Politely. Right?
Right.
Okay. The emergency room at Emory, or anyone that you've ever worked at, is not at all like the emergency room in Grey's Anatomy, is it?
No.
It's not at all like the emergency room in, it's maybe dating myself, but St. Elsewhere or Marcus Welby, right? That's not the way real life is it?
No.
And patients who express something about when they're, again, in pain and all of that, this isn't a romance novel where you'd expect them to say, yes, one last time, I need to see my husband and exchange our vows or something like that, right?
Well, no, her expectations aren't what we're getting into. I think you've established that there's variability in processing grief.
Well, I'm actually on the topic of Mrs. McIver's statement as opposed to grief at this point.
Okay.
Is that okay?
It is, but
Okay.
that question, I think, still is.
You didn't interpret her statement to you as your interpretation based on what you heard had anything to do with anger or fault or anything else. It's,
Don't answer the question. How is...
I think the rules of evidence allow a witness to say how I interpreted a statement based on perception, based on experience, just like if, well, I don't long speaking objection.
Sure. Well, no. You were explaining to me the basis for the question. If you want to ask this witness, did she perceive the Ms. McIver to be angry? That's fine. I take your question to be, what do you think was behind her answer? And we're not going there, nor should we.
Did you understand what I was allowed to ask? Did you perceive? Could you ask it? I'm seriously.
Okay.
I want the question to be right. I want to hear the answer.
Well, I'm not right, but what I'll allow.
That's the same thing.
Was it your perception, Dr. Hardy, at the time Ms. McIver told you no, she doesn't want to see her husband, that she was angry?
No.
That was my last question. Mr. Ryan, redirect.
Yes. Do you have a perception at all?
No.
Right. And in your experience, is it, have you seen scenarios where the spouse is in pain, appreciates their dying, is given the opportunity to see the other spouse, and they say yes? You've experienced that,
I
right?
think of a specific patient. Yes.
Okay. And she was coherent.
I was a little unclear with the answer. I can't think of a specific patient.
Yeah. That's what we have. Please rephrase that. So.
Okay, yeah. I think what Mr. Samuel asked you is like,
Have a patient that wanted to see a loved one. And
Right.
after that, they knew they were dying.
right,
Yes.
right. Yeah. And she appeared to be coherent when she said no. Correct?
Right.
Let me ask you this. Did you know that Grey's Anatomy was a show about a level 1 trauma center ER?
I didn't know it was specific to level 1.
Okay. Thank you.
You didn't know?
They don't have emergency medicine physicians running that show.
All right. If there are any questions from the jurors, now would be the time to pass them to the left, and Deputy Murphy will get them. I don't see any. May Dr. Hardy be excused.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't take the little flag stick with you.
Okay. You want me to take the rest of this?
Anything is yours, you should take.
This one. All right, this one.
How long have you been employed at Emory University Hospital?
About 31 years.
Okay. And are you employed at the main campus or another campus?
I'm at the main campus on Clifton Road.
Okay. And have you been at that campus the entire 31 years?
No, sir.
Okay. How long have you been at the main campus?
I've been back in the ER 9 years.
And you said the ER. What are you assigned to do with the ER?
I do patient access, which registers in the patients.
Are you the first point of contact for patients in the ER?
No, sir.
Okay. What are some of your job duties and responsibilities in the ER?
I do the insurance, I do the patient demographics, I do the registering, the scheduling.
Okay. And were you employed at the Emory main campus ER on September 25th of 2016?
Yes, sir.
And do you remember, I know it's been some time, what your hours were back then?
I was on the night shift.
Night shift? And is that started around 7?
I think at that time my shift may have started at 5.
Okay. And you remember what time you got off?
Anywhere from 5 till 7 or 7 till 9:30. I was doing like doubles at times, so it could have been any time between 5 in the morning and 9:30 in the morning.
Oh, right.
It could be.
And on that evening, when you were working the night shift, did you become aware that somebody, a female, was in the valet area that needed assistance?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how did you learn that?
Someone came in the ER emergency room doors and said they had a victim that was in the valet round that had been shot.
And did you run out there?
No, sir. There was a nurse in front. That's the first line of contact. So the nurse sits, we sit in a two-way. She sits here directly in front of the door, and I sit here next to her. And so by that time, when the person came in, we both got up, the nurse and myself, and we both grabbed gloves because, you know, I was trying to help her. I didn't know how quick the other team members would respond, but at that time, Allison was the nurse. She said on her walkie she needed help in the valet round. And I also said it on the walkie because I was not sure that they heard her. So I had a walkie as well, and I said assistance in the valet round. And by that time, Allison was out of the door, and everybody else was coming through the side doors that was going to assist her.
Okay. And do you remember how the patient was brought into the ER?
She was brought in a wheelchair, and Allison was pushing the wheelchair, and 2 or 3 other people were holding her legs.
And at that point, did you begin to assist with any of her medical treatment?
I tried to get the patient information to get her registered in the system, and we were calling out, asking about her information so that we could get her into the system. Yes,
And
sir.
you said you were trying to get her information.
Yeah, her name and date of birth.
Were you able to get that?
I was running behind them, and then they gave it to me, yes.
Okay, when you say they, who gave it to you?
I think it was her husband. He yelled out her name and date of birth.
Okay. And what did you do after you got the information?
So when I was running behind them, they went into room 2, which is one of our rooms where they take emergent life-threatening situations. I got the information, turned around, went back to the front to register her in. her bracelet printed, and then I went back into the room that she was in.
And when you went back into the room, did you have any part of treating her at that point?
I put her bracelet on her, and then I just stood back.
And when she came in to the ER, you said you saw her husband. Did you see her come in with anybody else?
No.
Okay. Through the evening, did any other family or friends come into the ER looking for Miss McIver?
Yes, sir. Shortly after that, so I put the bracelet on. I was standing there listening to what was going on in the room that she was in. I went back out to make sure that nobody was on the front because I'm responsible for registering the patients, and so I had to make sure that someone was up there. When I went back out, there was a young lady that came in asking for the patient that had been shot.
Okay. And do you remember anything distinctive about the young lady?
She had on a cowboy hat and some boots.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 257. Is this the young lady that you're referring to?
Yes, sir. But she had her hair pulled back.
Okay. And did you have to interact with her at that point?
Yes, she asked where the lady was, so I was the one that walked her through the doors to take her back to where the patient was.
And did you continue to interact with her, or did you go back up to the front desk?
I went back to the front.
And the front desk that you're talking about, is that near like where the triage area is?
Yes, it is.
And are there waiting rooms adjacent to or across from?
It's wide open. The front where we register the patients and the triage, all of that's in the same connector. The triage is closed off, but the waiting area is wide open.
And did you go back into critical room 2 at any point after that?
I was in and out, yes.
At some point, did Ms. McIver get transferred up to the OR?
She did, yes.
And what floor is the OR on?
The OR is on the 3rd floor.
And after her transfer, did you have an opportunity to go up to the OR?
Yes, sir, I did.
When I say the OR, I mean the OR floor.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you go into the actual operating room, or where on the floor?
I took the patient's husband upstairs to the 3rd floor in the pre-admit area. It's a waiting area. Yeah.
And when you took him up, I'm assuming, did you take the stairs? Did you take an elevator?
We took the A and B elevators, which is the first set of elevators, and we took it to the 3rd floor.
And in the elevator, is it just the two of you, or is there anybody else?
It was just the 2 of us when I took him up.
At that time, when you're in the elevator, is there any conversation occurring?
No, sir.
Okay. Is the defendant, is he crying?
No, sir.
Can you describe his demeanor?
He was very calm and quiet.
Calm and quiet?
Yes.
And when you got to the 3rd floor of the OR area, where did you go on it?
So when we got off the elevator, the waiting room sits to the right. So we went into the right area, and the way that it's set up, the chairs face this way. So they're like a bunch of chairs. Mm-hmm. We went right into the sitting area, and we sat in the first 2 chairs.
You sat in the first 2 chairs?
Yes, sir.
And
well, the way that it's open is the first 2 chairs closest. If you turn around, it's to the left. If you face it the right way.
The chairs, just focus on the chairs, the Stacey's at 256. Are the chairs similar to that on the 3rd floor?
Yeah, they could be, but they're in the floor. They're in the middle of the floor.
Middle of the floor, okay. Where on the 3rd floor waiting room are the chairs right next to each other like that?
Yes.
Okay. And you said you sat in one and he sat in one?
Yes, sir.
And was there a chair in between, or were you right next to each other?
We were right next to each other, but that was later. When I first took him up, I went up and then headed back downstairs. Just as I headed back down, one of the officers asked me to go back and sit with him. They didn't want him by himself. And so that's when I went back in and sat beside him.
Okay. And while you are sitting beside him, is there any sort of conversation going on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what do you remember the defendant said first?
What he first said?
Yes.
When I sat down beside him, I asked him how he was doing, and he was like, not good. And then tried to strike up a conversation with him just to get him going and to make him know that I was concerned about him because he was very quiet. And so we got to talking, and I asked him where he was coming from or where they had been, and he said they were coming from a retreat in Conyers. And I said, Conyers? And he goes, yes. I said, I live in Conyers. I said, I wasn't aware of a retreat in Conyers. And he nodded his head and said, yes, there was a retreat in Conyers. And then I said, huh. So I said, who all was going to the retreat or coming from the retreat? And he goes, it was myself and my wife and the friend of ours. He said, do you know where the friend of ours is? And I said, no, sir, I'll try and find her. I said, what was her name? He said, her name is Stanley Joe. He said, she came in with me. And so I said, well, I'll go look for her if you'd like. And then he goes,
I'm going to ask you to slow down just a little bit. At some point, I got to interject a question, okay? You're taking away all my job duties.
We're making a lot of progress. Just saying.
Just wanted to make sure Miss Harris is able to get it all.
yeah, so he mentioned the retreat, and then I started trying to talk about the retreat.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop for a second and see if Mr. Abate has any questions, and then we'll get back to what you remember.
So you took my next question right out of my mouth. You said he was coming from a retreat in Conyers. He mentioned it. And then your response, I think you said, was, in Conyers, where? And why did you have that response?
Because I live in Conyers and I'm aware of everything as far as the newsletters and everything that goes on in Conyers.
So since you are aware of everything that happens in
Not
Conyers,
everything, but mostly if I read the papers.
to your knowledge, was there a retreat happening that weekend?
It could have been, but I wasn't aware of it.
One you weren't aware of, okay. Now, you said that he asked you where Danny Joe was?
Yeah,
Okay. And did you know?
I didn't.
In response to his question, what did you do next?
I kept trying to talk with him. I had told him I'd go down and look for the young lady that came in with him.
Did he say why he was looking for Danny Joe?
He said, I think he said he needed to talk to her.
And were you able, did you actually go down and look for her?
I started down and then I came back up because just as I went down, the officer that had told me to go back upstairs with him told me to stay with him. But he didn't know if I didn't go down and look.
You got to keep your voice up though.
Okay.
You said, the last thing you said was he didn't.
He had asked me to go downstairs to look for his friend, but I didn't go all the way down.
Now, when you came back up, or from not going all the way down, what did you do next?
I continued to sit beside him, and then, we were talking.
Okay. And while you were talking, do you remember anything else that the defendant said to you?
Yeah, he said that his wife was all by herself. She was the only one. That was what drew him to her. She didn't have any family.
Okay. So he said, did you ask him anything about whether his wife had any family?
No, I didn't ask him that.
So
He volunteered
just
that.
offered to you that. Repeat it for me one more time.
That his wife was the only one. She didn't have any family.
And what did he say? I think you had a. After he said that, did he say something else?
Yeah, and I continued to try and talk to him, and then he said he wanted to just sit quietly. He didn't remember I tried to ask him what had happened as far as the situation with his wife being shot, and he said he didn't remember.
So you asked him, I guess, how did your wife get shot?
I asked him what happened. I didn't ask him how did she get shot. I asked him what happened.
And his response was?
He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't remember. If I recall right.
If we can go back up to you said his wife was the only one that didn't have any family. And I think you said after that, that's what drew him to her?
Yeah, he said that's what drew him to her.
And he just said that to you without any question prompting that?
Right.
All right. So after he said he didn't remember what happened, he didn't want to talk about it, did you guys keep talking?
I kept trying to strike a conversation with him. I apologized to him because he said he didn't want to talk about it. He said he just wanted to sit quiet. And I told him, I said, I was just trying to keep you occupied. And he said, I appreciate that, but I just want to sit here in silence. And so we just sat there beside each other. And then shortly after we got quiet and I stopped asking the questions, the officer came up and signaled for me to bring him into the observation room, or the room that the doctors wanted to talk to him in.
And is the observation room on the same floor, on the third floor?
It is on the same floor. So when you walk out of the wait area, you go back to the left towards the elevators, then the room is right there to the right, just before the elevators.
Okay. And when you get into the room, who's in there?
The two doctors that had done the surgery. I escorted the patient's husband in. Myself, and then there was another officer, the one that signaled for me to bring him in.
Okay.
And it may have been one other officer there, but I don't remember. But it was like the two doctors, him and myself, and Officer McCall.
And while you were talking to him out in the family waiting area, did you notice anything about his breath?
Yes, he had alcohol in his breath.
Okay. And when you sat down in the observation room with him, what happened first?
I asked him what happened. Yeah, I asked him.
No, in the observation room.
Oh, in the observation room. Forgive me. So when we went into the room where the doctors were, the doctor asked us to close the door. So McCall, the officer that was on staff with me, he pushed the door behind him with his hands back, and then McIver was sitting while we were like this. The doctors were standing here. One was standing up. One was sitting here. It was Mr. McIver, myself, and then Officer McCall.
Okay. And are you around the table, or is there just individual chairs in the observation room?
I don't remember if there was a table there, but it could have been a table. But we were like this in the room.
Okay. So kind of like in sitting around a circle, may or may not have been at a table. Okay. What happened next as you're sitting down? What's the first thing that happened?
So just as he sat down, the doctor introduced himself to him as one of the surgeons that had worked on his wife. And then the doctor apologized to him. He said,
you don't have to tell me what the doctor said.
Okay.
Now, do you know who the doctors were?
No.
Okay.
They were OR doctors.
Okay. And while in there, does Mr. McIver make any comments?
Yes.
Okay. And what does he say?
So after the doctor told him that she didn't make it, he again said she didn't have any other family, and it was just him and her, and that was again one of the reasons that he was drawn to her. And he said, then he said he needed to call the guys and let them know that Danny Boy did good, and I don't know what that meant, but that's what he said.
Okay, so this is after the surgeons or the doctors had told him that his wife had passed. He
Yes.
said, repeat that for me one more time. I didn't catch it.
He said that it was just her and him. She didn't have any family. Again, he stated that was like the second time he said that. He said that she didn't have any family, and that was what drew him to her, and that he needed to call the boys and let them know that Danny Boy did good.
Danny Boy did good?
Yes.
And I think I heard you say that you didn't know what that meant.
I didn't know what that meant.
Did you ask him what he meant by that?
No, sir. Myself and Officer McCall, I looked at him, and he kind of looked at me, and I shrugged my shoulders, but nobody said anything. They were just letting him talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
And after this exchange is going on, do you guys stay in the room, or do you leave shortly afterwards?
Well, after he was making the comments, a young man knocked on the door, and Officer McCall let him in, and he said, his best friend, he says, that's my best friend. He says, I know him in good hands. That's my best friend. So we've been friends for years. Mm-hmm. And so then I spoke to the man because I knew him by face.
Okay. And who was the man?
Steve Maples is his name, and he's an attorney.
Okay. And how did you recognize or know Mr. Steve Maples?
I knew him by face because he had represented my nephew in a criminal case.
In a criminal case?
Yes.
And do you guys stay in the room with Mr. Maples and Mr. McIver, or do you eventually leave?
It was a short second. Shortly after Mr. Maples spoke, he asked if he could be alone with Mr. McIver.
Okay.
And so everybody got up and left out, and we stood in the hallway.
And do you remember about how long you stood in the hallway while waiting for Mr. McIver and Mr. Maples?
Probably about 3 or 4 minutes.
And do they shut the door? Do they leave the door open?
I don't remember.
Okay. Could you hear what was going on in the room?
No.
Now, did you go back down to the first floor, the ER floor?
We did. We all did, yes. We all went down together.
And where did you go?
So we all went back down on the AB elevators, and when you get down on the bottom floor, the first floor, you just go through the slide and then go back into the ER where you register the patients, and that's where we all went.
Okay. And do you know if later that early morning, Mr. McIver gets seen by staff in the ER?
He did.
Okay.
He showed up on the board.
He what?
Yes, he was on the board as a patient.
Okay. And do you see him physically go into the ER?
As a patient, you mean?
Yes.
No.
Okay. While he is a patient or being seen, do you see Danny Joe or the lady with the cowboy hat again?
No.
Okay. Do you see her again that evening?
Yes, sir.
Or that morning, excuse me?
Yes.
When do you see her again?
It was after Mr. McIver had been discharged.
After he had finished whatever whatever was being taken care of back in the ER.
Yes, he was showing up on my board as discharged.
And where did you see Danny Joe or the lady with the cowboy hat?
She was in the waiting room.
Okay. And does Mr. McIver join her in the waiting room eventually?
Yes, sir.
And is anybody else in the waiting room with Danny Joe and Mr. McIver?
Yes.
Who?
Steve Maples, and then another man came in.
Okay. The other man, can you describe what he looks like?
He had long gray hair.
Okay. And if you
Or
saw a
blonde
photograph of the other man, you think you would recognize him?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 263, and you let me know if you recognize.
Yes.
Okay. How do you recognize States Exhibit 263?
His hair.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say his hair, is that a fair and accurate copy or fair and accurate depiction of how the man with the long hair that you were just describing appeared on September 25th of 2016?
Yes.
This time around, the state tender was marked as States Exhibit 263.
Any objection to 263? It's admitted.
Thank you,
Mr.
Judge.
Samuel shook his head no.
Had you ever seen this man or gentleman before?
No, sir.
Okay. And are they all in the waiting room?
Yes.
Okay. And how long after Mr. McIver's discharge and joining Danny Joe and Mr. Maples in the waiting room do they stay?
About probably 45 minutes to an hour.
And during those 45 minutes to an hour, is there any medical reason for Mr. McIver to stay in the waiting room?
No, sir.
And do they leave eventually?
Yes, sir.
During the time, are you watching them while they are sitting in the waiting room?
Yes, sir.
And at any point while Mr. McIver is sitting in the waiting room, do you see him crying or break down?
No, sir.
And, does he appear any differently than you had seen him earlier that morning and at the late evening on September 25th of 2016?
No, sir. He was
it
calm.
just the same.
Yeah, he was calm. He was talking though with the people in the waiting area. He wasn't talking as much upstairs.
And were you able to hear anything that Mr. McIver and the other people were talking about?
No, sir.
Well, thank you, Ms. Armstrong.
Yes, sir.
We're going to take our afternoon break after we finish with Ms. Armstrong. If you guys can do that, great. Mr. Samuel.
Ms. Armstrong, just a couple minutes. You were present when the wheelchair was, I'm going to go back to the beginning, around 10:15 or so.
Yes,
okay? You were present when Diane McIver was brought in on a wheelchair, correct?
Yes, sir.
And is it your understanding, or your observation that she was responsive at that point?
I couldn't tell. She was in the wheelchair.
Okay. Was she talking?
I don't know. I wasn't with the group of people that was bringing her in.
Well, do you remember giving a statement in this case?
I do.
Talking to the police? Have you looked at that statement
I have, yes.
recently?
Yes, sir.
Who did you give this statement to? Do you remember who was present?
It was a few people in the room when I gave my statement.
Some of the people who were here?
Yes, sir.
Did you say to them, Allison, that's one of the nurses, was pushing her in, correct?
Yes.
We're talking about Ms. McIver on the wheelchair, right? Okay. Allison was also asking her questions.
Allison was asking questions out loud. I don't know that she was asking them to her. She was just speaking out loud.
And then you said, and by the time we got the door open for her to go into the room, we're talking about the emergency room, correct?
Into the ER, into the room 2.
She was still talking.
Allison was talking.
She was responsive.
No, I don't know that.
Right.
When they were pushing her in the wheelchair, I was nowhere near them.
Do you remember saying this to the...
She was responsive when I went into the room. Yes, sir, I did say that to one of them. She was responsive when I went into the room. After I put the bracelet on her, Dr. Hardy was talking to her.
I'm going to show you, this is a transcript of the statement you gave. Did they send you a copy of this for you to review?
I've seen it. No, I've seen it though. Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you just to look at lines 4 and 5, which is what you said, and see if that refreshes your recollection as to what you told Mr. Rucker and the other people who were interviewing you. It's just 2 lines, ma'am.
I've read it.
Okay. Does that refresh your recollection?
I mean, I wasn't near them when Allison was yelling out. Allison was trying to tell them that she was needed help, and so that's what they were yelling in when she came through the wheelchair. I wasn't near the wheelchair.
Okay. Did you tell Mr. Rucker here, by the time we got the door open for her to go into the room, she was still talking, she was responsive, and she was trying to tell Allison, the nurse, what happened? Did you tell them that?
If that's what's there, that's what I had to tell them, but I'm not familiar with that because I wasn't near the wheelchair. I didn't talk to anybody, and I was listening in the room once I put the bracelet on the patient.
Okay. And then, page 19, you said, as I was going back and forth between the room and the front desk, I wanted to see what was going on. The patient was talking as she came in the room. And by the time everything was over, she wasn't talking. So as she was coming in the room, she was talking. Is that correct?
She was on the bed when she was talking, when I heard her talking.
What you heard her saying was, it was an accident, right?
Yes.
You heard Ms. McIver say that?
I did, yes, sir.
Okay. And she was coherent when she said it, correct?
She was.
How long was it after she was in the ER and Dr. Hardy and the other doctors and all the nurses were there? How long was it after that that she was brought up to the operating room on the 3rd floor?
Probably about 40 minutes. I'm not sure because I wasn't keeping up with the time, but I was in and out.
That's fine. And when did you first see Mr. McIver?
When I took him up to the 3rd floor.
Is it your memory that he came into the hospital just as you were going up to the operating room?
He was actually, I took him up to the 3rd floor.
Did you hear my question? Was it your impression that he was just coming into the hospital when you were going up to the operating room?
No, sir. It wasn't.
You think he was already there?
Yeah, he was already there because he was one of the, I think he was one of the ones that came in the doors in the beginning. I don't remember.
Do you remember telling the folks back here. So they got her to the operating room, OR. By that time, her husband was coming. I went back to the front, and the husband was coming in the door.
Yeah.
And he was like, quote, "I'm looking for my wife. She's been shot," or whatever. Is it your impression that he just arrived at the hospital at that point? Is that your memory of what happened?
It could have been.
So your memory is that he arrives at the hospital 40 minutes after she's in the ER.
Well, I don't know what time he arrived, but he was coming back through the doors when I came back out the second time.
Okay. You went up to the OR and it was a different waiting room there. We don't have a picture of that waiting room, correct?
I'm not sure. If you have a picture.
There was a different waiting room up there than the one from the first floor, right?
Yes, it is.
And he just didn't want to talk, right? Mr. McIver did not want to talk.
Right, he didn't want to talk after he stressed that to me, he didn't want to talk. But at first he didn't say he didn't want to.
And that's not unusual for someone who's there. You had other people before, no doubt, who I just don't want to have conversation for the sake of conversation, right?
Usually people talk to me, no problem with it.
You're a good talker. I mean, a good communicator, right?
I am.
But some people just don't want to talk, right?
Yes, sir.
And he was one of those. Please, just let me sit here quietly.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
It wasn't ugly to you, was it?
No, sir.
It was very polite and nice to you about it, right?
Yes, it was.
You asked a couple more questions, and he said, what Mr. Body wrote down there was don't remember, but first what he says is, I don't want to talk about it, and then he said, I don't remember, correct?
Yeah, he said he didn't want to talk about it, he didn't remember.
Okay. He was basically cutting off the conversation,
Yes.
right? In a nice, polite way.
Yes, sir.
Okay. When is the first time you see the lawyer for your nephew, Steve Maple?
When he comes into the room on the third floor.
Third floor. So he never came into the first floor, did he? That you saw?
In the end, he did.
Okay. Well, that's a good answer, but let me go back and give a different question. You had been downstairs
Right.
originally. You never saw Steve, you didn't see Steve Maples down there before you and Mr. McIver go up to the third floor, am I
Yes.
correct?
You are correct.
Okay. He didn't come into the hospital, as far as you know, until after Mrs. McIver and Mr. McIver were on the third floor.
That's correct.
That's the first time he shows up at the hospital, as far as you know.
Yes, sir.
So it was not between 10:15 and 11:03 that Mr. Maples arrives, correct?
I'm not sure at the time.
If the operating room begins at 11:03, the elevator up is at 11:03,
Okay.
Mr. Maples doesn't arrive at the hospital until after 11:03, right? If that's when the operating room,
I didn't see him before 11:03.
and he takes an elevator by himself up to the third floor.
I'm not sure.
He comes up to the third floor.
Yes, sir.
Maybe he walked. And you recognize him.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Maples, remember me? He actually remembers you too, right?
Yes.
And then you see the woman with the cowboy hat, Danny Jo Carter, correct?
I saw her earlier when she first came in, and then I walked her back to two.
Do you think when you heard Mr. McIver say Danny Boy, maybe what he was saying was Danny Joe?
I can't say what he was thinking of.
I mean, you've never figured out what Danny Boy means.
No, sir.
You said that to them a couple times, and it's in the transcript. Is it possible that you didn't understand what he said, or didn't hear it clearly?
No, sir. He said he needed to call the boys and let them know that Danny Boy did good.
Danny Boy did good.
Yes.
Okay. And then finally, much later in the evening, maybe early morning, is the next time you see them. Well, strike down. I know you're not going to strike anything, but after you go into the other room on the third floor, you learn that she has passed away in the operating room, correct?
Yes, sir.
And do the doctors talk to him about being able to go see her after she's deceased?
No, sir.
And then everybody goes downstairs, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you kind of lose track of them for a while, is that right? For several hours?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. And then he goes and gets admitted, correct?
Yes.
Or he becomes a patient.
Yes, sir.
And you see him when he comes out. Now it's, whatever, 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Carter, Andrew Carter, and the man, her husband, are sitting in the waiting room now, right?
Yes.
Waiting.
All of them.
And he joins them, correct?
He was there with them already when I noticed him the second time.
Very good. He had he'd been discharged, I think you said, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And now there's 4 of them sitting in the waiting room again talking, correct?
Yes, sir.
Ms. McIver just died at this point.
Yes.
Do you have any idea how many cars these people have all come in?
No,
Do
sir.
you have any idea how people are trying to figure out how to get home?
No, sir.
Do you know if Mr. Carter, the man with the long hair, and Danny Joe Carter were left together in one car, do you know?
They didn't. I mean, I don't know if they didn't leave in the same car, but they left out later. I mean, he sat there a while after everybody else had walked out.
Who's the he in that sense?
The man with the long hair.
He stayed later?
Yeah, he sat there a little longer than the rest of them did.
Okay. And do you know where this is probably rhetorical, but do you know where everybody went to when they left at 6 or 7 in the morning?
No, sir.
And do you know, or have you looked at the medical records that shows that Mr. McIver had gotten medication while he was in the...
No, sir.
You don't know, or the answer is no?
I didn't look at the medical records. No, sir.
If you looked at the medical records, could you tell whether he got medicated Ativan or Xanax or something like that while he was in the...
Yeah, usually I don't have access to the medical records unless there's a need.
But he was, again, fairly quiet and contemplative, sitting in the waiting room, and then everybody leaves, correct?
You mean when we came back downstairs?
Everybody's downstairs in the waiting room at 5 or 6 in the morning now.
They were all talking.
Okay. And then eventually they get up and leave.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's all. Any redirect, Mr. Abate?
Very few questions, Griffin. Thinking back from Mr. Samuel's point, while everyone was in the hospital, do you know where everybody went at all times?
No, sir.
So it's very possible that Mr. Maples showed up and was in the hospital before you saw him on the 3rd floor?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you were talking earlier about hearing the word responsive, what did you mean by she was responsive?
She was talking.
Okay. And to your best recollection, when was the first time that you heard Ms. McIver talking?
When Dr. Hardy was asking her, well, she said she had been shot. Dr. Hardy asked her, she said, he was shot, and then she said, yeah, I've been shot. She said, but it was an accident.
And I believe you said on direct and cross that you were in and out of critical room 2?
Yes, sir.
So did you hear what Ms. McIver said before she said she had been shot and was an accident?
No, sir.
Did you hear what she said after she said she had been shot?
She said it was an accident.
Well, after she said she had been shot and it was an accident, did you hear what she said after that?
No.
Okay. And is that because you were in and out of the room?
Yes, that was.
Okay. So is it fair to say you didn't hear everything that Ms. McIver said that you did?
Yes, sir.
Now, also, do you know where the family room is located on the 1st floor?
Yes, sir.
Did you go into that family room?
No, sir.
Okay.
And normally I'm the one to take the patients back to the family room, so we didn't go to the family room.
Okay. But so you personally didn't ever go into the family room that night Ms. McIver and the defendant were there?
No, sir. I took the lady that came in looking for her to the room. She was outside the door when I was going in and out.
And when did you do that?
I did that when she came in and said that her friend had been shot.
Was that
So that was in the beginning.
You just anticipated my next question. And Mr. Samuels said that Mr. McIver didn't want to talk when you were on the third floor. Were there a lot of times that he spoke to you without you even asking a question?
He did 2 different times.
Okay.
He said that she didn't have any family, and he said that they were coming from a retreat in Commerce.
No further questions.
Any questions from the jurors for Ms. Armstrong? Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Oh, yes. Sorry. Didn't mean to ignore it. Described the person as an officer came up and asked you and Mr. McIver to go into that consultation room where the doctors came to deliver the news that Ms. McIver had passed.
I'm not sure of the time. I think it was probably between 1 and 3. It was somewhere between there.
Okay. Somewhere between 1 and 3 is your...
Yeah, because time was passing fast that night, because every time I would look, I'd say, Dog, is that time already? So time was going by fast that night.
All right. Any follow-up based on that question, Mr. Abate? Mr. Sam? Thank you, sir. All right, Ms. Armstrong, appreciate your time. We're free to go.
Thank you.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we will have our afternoon break. We'll try to get you back in here in a little less than 10 minutes. Obviously, as I said before, if you need more time, you'll get more time. When you get back in here, we'll find out who the state's next witness is. Thank you.
Judge, all jurors are present and accounted for.
Thank you, Deputy Murphy. Ladies and gentlemen, as you're working through milestones, that was your last break of the week. That's a milestone for you. Your next break we'll see you on Monday. The state has told me they've got some more witnesses to get us through the rest of the afternoon. Who's the next one?
Ryan Johnson. Ryan Johnson.
Ryan Johnson.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you should give the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes, sir, if you will. Have a seat. Get as close to the mic as you can. For the purposes of the court's record, please state and spell your name.
My name is Ryan Johnson, RYAN JOHNSON.
Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson. How are you doing? Why don't you tell the jury where you're employed? It's a mystery, but why don't you go ahead and tell them?
Yeah, I work at Emory University Hospital in the Health Department.
So you're probably not the first Emory University hospital nurse that's coming here.
Right.
How long have you worked there?
Just over 4 years now, as a nurse
Where in the hospital do you work?
in the emergency room.
Okay. And over the last 4 years, have you been in the ER, the emergency room, the entire time?
Yes.
Okay. Tell the jury a little bit about your educational background.
Yeah, got my bachelor's degree at Kennesaw State University. Just got my master's in December from Emory.
Okay. And were you employed on September 25th of 2016?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury what hours or shift you were working that Sunday evening?
7 p to 7 a.
And did you become aware that there was a patient that evening that needed immediate assistance in the valet area?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember how you became aware of that?
I can't remember exactly how.
Do you remember what you did once you learned that?
Yeah, I started moving out towards the valet area. Before I could get out there, they were already wheeling a patient inside.
Okay. And when you say wheeling, was she in a wheelchair or on a gurney?
In a wheelchair.
Okay. And once you saw her, what was the first thing that you did?
Started heading towards room 2. That's where we were headed.
And when you got to room 2, did you assist in the transfer of the female or Miss McIver onto the gurney?
Yes.
Okay. And after the transfer, were you part of any of the medical treatment that was provided?
Yes.
Okay.
Kind of on and off.
On and off. So you were in and out of the room?
Yes.
Do you remember any specific parts of the treatment that you were part of?
Helped get her clothes off and get her into the gown. Did a I helped trying to get some IV lines, running for supplies, specifically blood.
And when you say running for supplies of blood, is that why you were in and out of the room?
Part of the reason. I was also the triage nurse that night, so
Okay.
I couldn't get too involved.
Okay. So you actually, when you say triage, is that area inside the ER or is it outside by the lobby?
It's in the ER. It's kind of sectioned off from the lobby a little bit, but it's kind of right there.
Okay. While you were in critical room 2, did you hear anything that Ms. McIver said, or did she say anything?
Yes, she was. We were specifically asking her questions, what happened, and she said that she was shot. And at one point she had said that it was an accident. Don't remember exactly how the conversations went. But.
Okay. And do you remember hearing her say who shot her?
Yes, her husband.
While you were in and out of the room, do you remember hearing her say anything else?
No.
Okay. Did she appear to be in any pain?
Yeah.
Okay. Did she say anything about how much pain she was in?
I wasn't paying attention to it.
Okay. Now, you said you ended up going back to the triage area.
Yes.
How long would you say you were in and out of critical room 2?
I can't remember. It was a kind of a busy time. So
Let me
I
ask,
just.
ask a more specific question. Had you gone back to work in the triage area before Ms. McIver had been transferred to the OR?
Yes.
Okay. Now, tell the jury a little bit about what a triage nurse is supposed to do or does.
So the triage nurse essentially does an initial assessment and sorts the patients based on acuity or how sick they are.
Okay. And where is that done?
That's done up at the front of the emergency department,
Okay.
right there around the lobby.
Okay. So is it done out in the open, or is there a private room that you take?
Well, I would say semi-private rooms. There's another room with some curtains that separate it. But
Okay. So you're not asking questions in the middle of the family waiting room or the lobby?
correct.
Okay. Now, while or during the time that you were assisting with Ms. McIver's treatment, and throughout the evening, did you come in contact with the defendant, Mr. McIver?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes. Sorry, that was a long question. Did you see Mr. McIver, the defendant, that night?
Yes, I saw him once, kind of briefly, in the trauma room, or the resuscitation room, room 2, and then later that night when he checked in.
Okay. And if you look to your, I guess that would be your right, is that the trauma room that you're speaking of?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember where he was when you saw him?
Kind of to the door, just to the right, where the counter is.
So, right here by this curtain, near the curtain? Okay.
And again, it was kind of briefly. I wasn't really paying attention to him that much.
Okay. Now, you made it seem like you saw him a second time. When did you see him again?
Not until triage.
Okay. And you said not until triage. Did he check himself in? Can you tell the jury a little bit about that?
Yes, so he had checked himself in for anxiety.
Okay. And when he checked himself in for anxiety, was he alone?
I believe he had a friend with him in the waiting room, but when I actually had him in the triage room, he was alone.
Okay. His friend that you're referring to, were they a male or a female?
I can't remember.
Okay. I know it's been some time.
Yeah.
Back in the triage room or area, was it just the two of you?
I believe so. I had an orientee that night. I can't remember exactly if he was in the room with me or not.
Okay. So I'll ask a more specific question. Then, back in the triage area, was it just Mr. McIver and medical personnel?
Yes.
Okay. Now, can you describe for the jury, after he checked himself in and you're, I guess, evaluating him, what's his demeanor like?
How do you mean?
Is he calm? Is he hysterical?
No, he was pretty calm.
Okay. Are you asking him questions?
Yes. Essentially, he told me that I guess I know why you're or why I'm here. And then I essentially told him that I had a general idea, but he would have to actually tell me why he decided to check in, to which he told me, I wrote a very brief note, but essentially was giving me the symptoms of palpitations, anxiety, and towards.
I can't quite hear what he starts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lift your voice. Mr. Samuel is hard of hearing, so.
No, I'm not hard of hearing.
Either way, he can't give you every story.
But he gave me, essentially what I put in the note was he gave me the symptoms of shortness of breath, palpitations, and anxiety.
Okay. So you're back in the triage room, and he says to you, you know why I'm here.
Correct.
Okay. And you say, well, you're going to have to explain it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And what does he say to your question? He's having what?
Anxiety. It was the main thing that I remember.
And does he describe, I guess, the anxiety he's feeling, or does he describe what he's feeling?
Not to my knowledge, but I try and really direct my triages and keep it as short as possible.
Okay.
So
A minute ago, I think you said something about palpitations.
Correct.
Is that something he said, or is that something you gathered?
I don't know.
Okay. Do you remember, have you had an opportunity to look at Mr. McIver's medical records?
Yes.
And did you see palpitations in there?
Yes.
Okay. And where would you have gotten that from?
He would have had to have told me, but I don't know if he gave that, if he told me that himself or if I had to pull that out of him.
Okay. When you say pull that out of him, though, is that...
It's not uncommon for people coming into triage to not give you the entire story, so he may have just said anxiety, and I had to ask him, okay, what does that entail for you? What are you feeling? That's those sorts of questions.
Okay, does that make sense? So when you ask the question, what are you feeling? His response, what I'm hearing is, I'm having heart palpitations.
Correct.
Did he say, or did he describe anything else that he was, I guess, experiencing?
Just the shortness of breath.
Okay. Now, explain to the jury, I guess, do you do any physical evaluation of the patient or the defendant in this instance during the triage session?
Just vital signs.
Okay. What are vital signs?
So vital signs are various measures like your pulse, your respiratory rate, blood pressure, and pulse ox.
And you said they are what?
Heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, pulse ox, and temperature.
Okay. And did you check all the vitals on the defendant?
Yes.
And did any of his vitals exhibit any physical manifestations of anxiety?
So the blood pressure would have been the only one. It was elevated. It's not elevated to a point where you typically even really look at it in the emergency department, but it was technically elevated.
Okay. So it was elevated, but not to something that the ER staff would be concerned about. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
And did he have a elevated heart rate at all?
No.
And his respiratory rate, was his breathing belabored or labored?
No. It was at the high end of normal, which is 20 respirations a minute, but it was still within the normal range.
Okay, so nothing unusual. And was he able to speak and communicate with you?
Yes.
And while doing so, did he appear to have any issues with shortness of breath?
No.
Okay. What are the common signs or symptoms of the typical symptoms you see in somebody who's having anxiety or an anxiety attack?
If they have outward expressions of it, they're typically either pacing, irritable, increased respirations, heart rate, blood pressure.
Irritable. What was the other one?
Increased heart rate, respirations, blood pressure.
And did it appear that Mr. McIver had any of those symptoms when you treated him?
No.
Okay. Anything that you saw that would indicate to you, a medical professional, that he was having an anxiety attack?
No.
Okay. After you finished, I guess, triaging him, do you take him somewhere? Does he stay there? Where is he treated next?
So once I'm done with the triage, he goes back out to the waiting room, waiting for a room to be assigned to him.
Okay. And to your knowledge, was he assigned to a room?
Yes, but I don't know where.
Okay. Do you know if his wait after triage was short, long?
Short.
Okay. At that time, was the ER busy?
No.
As part of, I guess, the initial evaluation that you do during triage, do you ask him his medical history? If he's suffering from any medical illnesses or disorders?
Yes.
Okay. And when you asked him that, what did he tell you, if you can recall?
The only thing I had in the note was that he had high cholesterol and a couple surgeries.
Okay. Did he ever indicate to you that he was suffering from a sleep disorder?
No.
Or that he suffered from amnesia?
No.
Okay. Did you ask him at all during the time that you interacted with him what happened in the vehicle?
No.
Did you ask him how his wife got shot?
No.
And
Again, triage, I try and keep it as short as possible.
Okay. You got a job to do, and you're there to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you remember the time that you began your evaluation of Mr. McIver?
I don't. It would have been probably 5-7 minutes after the whatever time is listed on the triage note.
Okay. When looking at a copy of the medical records, help refresh your recollections when you saw him? Is that a yes? It's a yes from Ms. Harris.
Yes.
Okay. We'll just look as soon as, if that refreshes your recollection, just look up.
Okay.
Is your recollection refreshed?
Yep.
And what time did you see or begin your evaluation of Mr. McIver?
Around 4:40.
4:40. That'd be AM?
Yes.
Thank you, Judge. Nothing further. Susanne?
Mr. Johnson, my name is Don Sam, and I don't believe we've ever met, have we?
No, we haven't.
Okay. The point of triage, if I watched enough TV shows, is to try to figure out what kind of compartment we're going to put this patient in, right?
Essentially, we get kind of the ball rolling with labs and such.
With labs and such?
Yeah, that.
I mean, if it's an emergency and someone has a gunshot, you get triaged one place. If you're, got a headache, you get treated with a flu, you get triaged somewhere else, correct? You kind of make the first initial decision where this person needs to go and what kind of doctor, stuff like that. Is that right?
And not necessarily what kind of doctor, they're going to be seen by the same doctor regardless.
An ER doctor, I guess.
Right, yeah.
You certainly don't make diagnoses, do you?
No, sir.
Okay. You report what the patient says.
Mm-hmm.
You document that carefully, right? You chart that, right? That's
Correct.
the language we use. You type it into it gets uploaded to the chart.
Try
right?
to keep everything down to pertinent information because everything more detail is going to happen in the back. Again, we're just trying to guide the initial process.
And that's where the doctor is in the back. Correct. Okay, that's Dr. Rosing in this case, is that
Yes,
right?
sir.
Is he outside?
Yes,
Okay. He's the next witness?
I believe so.
Okay.
We'll find out.
I bet. And so your triage notes indicate that we're dealing with anxiety, depression. You knew it was because his wife had just died, correct?
Assuming so, yes.
In fact, he told you, my wife just died, correct?
I can't remember if he actually stated that or not.
Everybody in the ER knew what had happened 4 or 5 hours earlier, right? It would be like me saying, by the way, you're in the courtroom. I don't need to tell you that. You knew it, right?
Right.
And your notes are, everything you wrote is in the records here, right?
Correct.
Which are all in evidence, so we can review those, correct? Have you looked at the records? Is anything inaccurate in these records about what you typed in?
No.
Okay. Your name appears, triage notes, that would be you, correct?
Yes.
All right. And finally, going back in time, back around 10:20 or sometime between 10:15 and 10:30 at night, actually the day before, you were there when Ms. McIver was wheeled in, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Guess a yes or no, because she writes down yes or no. She can't write down uh-huh.
Sorry. Yes.
Yes. Did you actually see her coming into the ER? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And you were there inside the room in the ER too, correct?
Yes.
We call it the resuscitation room, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And you heard her say it was an accident, correct?
Correct.
When you gave a statement before to these folks over here, you said she said it defensively, is that right?
Yes.
I'm curious what you meant by defensively.
She seemed concerned that we were thinking that it was a purposeful action.
She seemed concerned that the doctors and nurses might have mistakenly thought it was purposeful, and so she was saying,
I'm going to object to speculation.
well, I'm going to ask why he used a word that he used.
I'll let you do that, but ask it a little more generically, your question, instead of giving a closing argument through your question.
Yeah, right, unlike all the charts here. Which is the purpose that you viewed her, the tone of voice she was using, when you say it was defensive.
Again, it seemed as though she was worried we were thinking that it was a purposeful action, that
To
he
shoot
had
her.
meant to shoot her.
I shouldn't have interrupted you, and you speak softly. Can you say it one more time, and then I'm going to sit down?
Which part?
The answer to that question.
It seemed like she was concerned that we thought it would be a purposeful action, and her husband had meant to shoot her.
Okay. And she was trying to just make sure that misimpression was not left with
Objection.
the doctors and
All the
nurses.
speculation, which he
Right, I think you've gotten the answer you're going to get.
That's what defensive meant to you.
Yes.
That's why you used the word defensive.
Yes.
You were describing her tone of voice, in essence, correct?
objection, asked and answered.
We've covered this.
Okay. I have no further questions.
You redirect, Mr. Abate.
Very few questions. When you described her tone of voice, could her tone also have been affected by the amount of pain she was in from being shot?
Possible.
And had you ever heard Mrs. McIver speak before September 25th of 2016?
No.
So is it true you don't know if she was responding defensively or in pain or anything about her tone of voice?
True.
No further questions.
Questions from the jurors for Mr. Johnson? Yep, okay. Those will be working their way to the left. And Deputy Emory. Were you in room 2 when Ms. McIver was moved from the wheelchair to the gurney?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall if Mr. McIver helped move Ms. McIver from the wheelchair onto the gurney?
I don't remember that.
All right. Any follow-up, Mr. Abate? Well, you don't remember that he was in there, or meaning you don't have a recollection of him being
I
there,
don't.
or you just don't remember?
I don't remember him being in there until just a little after we had got her into the bed.
Okay.
Stand, no questions.
Mr. Sam. All right. Thank you, sir. Next witness.
Thank you, Dr. Rosie. Good afternoon, Dr. Rosen.
Good afternoon.
Might assume you're not coming from the hospital?
No,
Can you tell the jury where you're coming from?
I do medical support for some of the local tactical SWAT teams, and I was on an event this morning.
Okay.
Everyone okay?
Oh, yes, sir. Everybody's fine, thank you.
Now, outside of working with the SWAT team, where are you employed, sir?
I work at Emory University as a assistant professor and at the Emory University Emergency Department, Clifton Road.
Okay. And as an assistant professor, what do you teach?
It's a clinical position. I do mostly practical labs and case scenarios. I don't lecture.
Okay. Are you training other, I guess, soon-to-be physicians or physicians?
We have med students and residents that rotate through the department.
Okay. And what kind of physician are you in at Emory?
I'm a board-certified emergency physician.
Okay. And tell the jury a little bit about your background in order to be a board-certified emergency room physician.
I attended medical school and then did a 4-year residency in emergency medicine at Charity Hospital in New Orleans, and then moved back to Atlanta in 1996 and have been employed here since then.
Okay. So about how long have you been a doctor? My math isn't very good.
I've been practicing in Georgia for 25 years.
Okay. And where have you practiced other than Emory?
Originally North Lake Regional Medical Center, and then DeKalb Medical Center, Northside Hospital, and now Emory.
And were you employed at Emory on September 25th, 2016?
Yes, sir.
And what were you working that day?
I worked that night shift and came in at 11 p.m.
11 p.m.
Yes,
And,
sir.
when did your shift end?
7 a.m.
And then did you go with the SWAT team?
No,
7:30?
not that. No, sir.
When you're in the ER, I guess where are you in the ER? Are you floating? Are you seeing all the patients? Is there a specific area that you focus on?
No, at the nighttime, we rotate through the entire emergency department wherever the next patient is to see.
Okay. And do you treat any specific type of patient, or do you treat all the patients?
Anyone that comes in.
Okay. And were you the only physician on staff that evening?
No, sir.
Okay. Who else, or who were you working with that night?
I routinely work with Dr. Hardy. Her and I are partnered to work Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday nights. And at that time, we rotated between 10 and 11. Now we both come in at 10 o'clock.
Okay. And I know Dr. Hardy is an attending. Are you also an attending?
Yes.
Okay. And while she is dealing with a patient, do you, I guess, pick up the slack, for better words?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And tell the jury a little bit about how you pick up the slack.
We go to where the patients are and who's needed. If one's tied up with a critical patient of certain nature, I try to see more patients so that we're not backlogged, and it's a good teamwork approach.
While she's working on one patient, it becomes kind of like a one-man show. You're doing the rest of the patients.
Yes.
Okay. And on that night, did this occur?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know what type of patient Dr. Hardy was treating?
Yes.
What type of patient was that?
I was informed that there was a gunshot victim.
And did that surprise you?
We don't routinely get gunshot victims at Emory University's campus.
Okay. And why is that?
We're not a designated trauma center.
Okay. And while she was treating the gunshot victim, did you ever have an opportunity to go into the room?
When I walked in and asked if they needed help, they said no, and I proceeded to start seeing the rest of the patients in the emergency department.
Okay. And while you were in, do you remember what room that you were in? Was it?
Not specifically.
Okay. And while you were in there, did you hear the patient or person being treated saying?
No, sir.
Okay. After you walked out of critical room 2, where did you go next?
Routinely, we go into what we call the yellow zone in order to pick up the physician that's leaving at 10 o'clock.
Okay. And if you'll turn to your right, can you tell the jury about the critical room that you walked into that evening?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I'm sorry, I turned my head, I know I trail off. When that evening when you walked in to see Dr. Hardy, is that the same room that you walked into?
Yes.
Okay. And after you left that room, do you remember how many patients you had to go pick up the slack for? Was it busy at that time?
I do not remember.
Okay. At any point, did you enter back into critical room 2 to assist with the care of Ms. McIver?
No.
Okay. While she's working on Ms. McIver, is it just business as usual for you?
Yes.
Okay. Did you notice at the hospital or in that area it was chaotic, or were you away from it the entire time?
I know that it was chaotic, but I just was doing my job.
Okay. Now, at some point, did you have the opportunity to come in contact or have an interaction with the defendant, Mr. McIver?
Yes.
Okay. And tell the jury a little bit about how and why.
They informed me that Mr. McIver had been signed in as a patient and needed to be evaluated, and he was placed in a room, and I went in and evaluated him, treated him, and according to the medical records, discharged him.
Okay. I know it's been some time and you've seen a lot of patients, but do you remember about how long your actual interaction was with the defendant?
After reviewing the chart, it maybe 10 minutes.
Okay. And is he in a room back in the ED or the ER?
Yes.
And when you walk in, what's the first thing that you do?
My routine and standard of practice is to introduce myself as well as my scribe, someone that comes along with a computer on wheels, and introduce them so that they know that who this person is that's typing on a computer.
Okay. And do you know why Mr. McIver had been admitted or needed to be seen by you?
His chief complaint was there. I try to review the record on the computer to see briefly what we're walking into. And his complaint, according to the record, was anxiety and depression.
Okay. And at that point, did you know that his wife had recently passed?
Yes.
Okay. And how were you aware of that?
I believe the trauma surgeon came down and notified us of her demise.
Okay. And do you recall or do you remember Mr. McIver's demeanor when you initially came in contact with him?
I don't have any personal recollection. I reviewed the medical records.
Okay. But today, is there anything that you observed that you would consider unusual or that stuck out in your mind?
No, sir.
Okay. And you said you reviewed the medical records?
Yes, sir.
Do you, after reviewing the medical records, do you recall, I guess, what your initial impressions were?
No.
Okay. Okay. What's the next thing you do? Do you check his vitals? What do you do next?
I review. You mean after introducing myself?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we review the vitals. I ask his pertinent medical questions, past medical history, surgical history, allergies, medications, social history, drugs, alcohol, tobacco use, and review of systems. What are his complaints presently? How long have they been going on? And then perform a routine physical exam.
Do you recall what his complaints were?
After reviewing the records, it was anxiety, depression. He was upset that his wife had just died.
Okay. And what are some of the typical, I guess, symptoms or things you would see when somebody's suffering from anxiety?
Depending on their level of anxiety and past history, it can vary from I feel anxious to pacing, jittery. unable to sit still.
Okay. And to your knowledge or recollection, did Mr. McIver have any past history of anxiety?
No, sir.
Okay. And was he seated when you walked into the room?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you recall him being pacing or being jittery?
It's not noted, so I don't think it was, because I would have noted something to that effect.
And when you say it's not noted, you mean that it's not in the medical record?
Correct.
And if you would have noticed that Mr. McIver was pacing or was jittery or fidgety, is that something you would have included in your, I guess, medical records or transcribed in your records?
That would be my standard of practice.
Did you also, I guess, check his heart rate or his pulse?
Reviewed the vital signs, yes, sir.
Okay. And when you said you reviewed them, did you just review them from triage or did you do them yourself?
I don't manually do them myself unless there's something abnormal that I was concerned about and needed to reassess.
And in this instance, was there something abnormal or something you felt that you needed to reassess?
After reviewing the record, no.
Okay. Other than him telling you he was feeling anxious, did he have any other physical manifestations of somebody who was suffering from an anxiety attack or a panic attack?
After reviewing the records, it only appeared that said he was anxious and he was tearful, but there was nothing grossly abnormal that I observed or noted.
Okay. So you said that he said he was anxious. So the only, I guess, indication of Mr. McIver actually having anxiety or a panic attack would be something that came from his mouth.
Yes.
Okay. After you, I guess, reviewed the vitals, asked him the initial questions, do you do anything else as part of your examination?
He performed he had an EKG performed, which I reviewed. It was a normal, after reviewing the records, it's a normal sinus rhythm with a normal heart rate. We did a basic physical exam, and that was the completion of what I felt was warranted for his complaint.
Okay, for some of us who aren't medical professionals, what is an EKG and what's the
I'm sorry. An EKG is an electrical reading that the heart, its rhythm, its rate, the orientation to determine if there's any signs of cardiac disease, abnormal heart rhythms, fast, slow heartbeats, irregular heartbeats.
Okay, and you said the results of his EKG were what?
Based on the record, it was a normal sinus rhythm, and I believe the rate was somewhere in the mid-60s. So normal sinus rhythm is a totally normal EKG.
And you said his heart rate was somewhere in the 60s?
I believe so, yes.
And after reviewing or doing the EKG and reviewing its results, did you do anything else, I guess, medically on Mr. McIver?
No, sir.
Okay. And did that complete, I guess, your physical examination?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you prescribe him any medication?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What medications?
I believe I gave him an Ativan there in the emergency department and prescribed him 4 low-dose Xanax for discharge.
And what is Ativan and what is
Sorry. Ativan and Xanax are both within the class of benzodiazepines. They're sedative hypnotics. In low doses, they can be used to calm people's anxiety, nervousness.
Okay, and you said you gave him low doses of both?
Correct.
And of the Ativan, what was the dosage? If you can
I
recall?
believe it was 1 milligram tablet.
And what would you consider to be, a high dose of Ativan?
2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay. So anything above 1?
Anything above 1. 1's the lowest dose that we have easily accessible in the emergency department.
And if somebody was, in the midst of a panic attack or an anxiety attack, would you give them a much higher dosage than 1?
Depending on the severity of their attack, yes.
Okay. So describe for the jury the severity or the symptoms of a severe attack, which you would prescribe somebody 3, 4, or 5 milligrams of Ativan.
Hyperventilation, unable to lay still, screaming, abnormal vital signs.
Did you see hyperventilation, screaming, or any abnormal vital signs with the defendant?
point in the record, I did not.
Okay. And then you also gave him, you said, 4 pills of
Yes.
Xanax?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember the dosage of the Xanax?
I believe they were 0.25 milligrams.
Okay. And did they get lower than that?
If you crack them in half.
Okay. So the actual physical pill, the smallest dosage you can have is 2.5.
I believe so, yes.
And how 4 pills will for how many days?
That would, if taking twice a day, it would be 24 to 36 hours.
And why did you not prescribe him more, like I said, more dose or more pills of either substance?
It's not my standard of practice to prescribe long-term anti-anxiety medications. It would be something to get him through 24, 36 hours, and if required more, he would need reevaluation in the emergency department or by his private physician.
Okay. Did you actually see him take either the Ativan or one of these Xanax pills?
No, sir.
Did you actually give him the medication before, I guess, he was discharged or left the room?
I wrote for the order to be given by the nursing staff, and I did not see him receive it.
And why did you not admit him to the hospital?
There was nothing that I felt was clinically indicated to admit him to the hospital.
Can you say that one more time for me?
I did not feel there was anything clinically indicated to admit him to the hospital.
And why is that? Or what do you mean by that?
Based on my assumption, he had symptoms that could be treated as an outpatient and did not require hospitalization.
Okay. And I believe you, for the Xanax, I guess, a pill, what was the dosage?
I believe it was 0.25.
Okay. If I was to show you a copy of the medical records, would that help refresh your recollection?
Yes. The record reflects I wrote him for 0.5 milligram tablets. 1 tablet twice a day, number 4.
Okay. Is 0.5 the smallest dosage, or is that still a very low dose?
A very low dose still.
Okay. Now, you said at the beginning how you knew his wife had passed or had died was because the surgeon had come down to tell him?
Came down and I believe told Dr. Hardy, since she was the primary physician, and that kind of news is a rare. Gunshot wounds are a rarity at Emory, so it was unusual to have that patient. So the surgeon came down to tell us the results of them going to the operating room.
Okay, and that's how you found out?
Correct.
Okay. And this is the, I guess, the initial part of your evaluation as you go over his social history, his medical history, etc.
Correct.
Did he ever tell you that he was suffering from a sleep disorder?
After reviewing the records, no, sir.
Okay, and did he ever indicate to you that he had suffered from amnesia?
After reviewing the records, no, sir.
Is the only, I guess, disorder or disease or medical illness that he told you he was suffering from high cholesterol?
I reviewed the records. I believe that he is on the medication and has to take something for cholesterol.
Okay. And I don't believe I have any further questions, but let me check with all of my counsels. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Salmon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Doug Samuel. I don't believe we've ever met before, have we?
No, sir.
Okay, we haven't talked about this case ever. I guess it goes without saying, your memory is basically, I've read the records and the records speak for themselves, correct?
Yes, sir.
If it's in the records, presumably they're accurate?
Yes, sir.
You don't write things in the records that are inaccurate, right?
Correct.
And even after reviewing it, it doesn't look like, why in the heck did I write that down, right?
Yes, sir.
It looks like a normal ER chart, someone coming in with anxiety, depression, that kind of thing, correct?
Yes, sir.
You knew his wife had just died, 4 hours earlier, correct?
I didn't know the time, but yes, she had died prior.
It wouldn't surprise you that someone whose wife died 4 hours earlier, someone unexpectedly comes in, remains in the hospital and is depressed and anxious and wants to get whatever the Xanax or Ativan.
Yes, sir.
That would be typical, right?
I don't know if I would use typical. It happens.
Okay. Even if you're not in the ER, would you agree with me that people who have an unexpected death in the family would take some kind of anti-anxiety or anti-depression drug?
Some people do, yes.
And that's in essence what he was coming down and asking for help from you all, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you didn't have a problem prescribing medication for him, did you?
No, sir.
You didn't think you were violating the Controlled Substances Act, did you?
No, sir.
You didn't think you were prescribing medication that it was illegal to prescribe because it was unnecessary, did you?
No, sir.
You thought it was an appropriate prescription.
Yes, sir.
He told you that when he left the hospital, he was going to see his own doctor. Do you recall that from reading the records, Dr. Hoos?
I said I think according to records, what I saw was that we had recommended he follow up with his primary doctor. I don't know if he said he was going to follow up with him.
He even gave you the name of the doctor? Do you remember?
He told me the name of Dr. Hoos.
Dr. Hoos?
Correct.
Okay. And that he was going to go see them later that morning?
I didn't know when he was going to see him, but that he would follow up with his doctor.
And just very quickly going through the records, you don't need to look at Mr. Bobby's notes here, but when he's discharged, there are instructions that are given to a patient, right?
Yes, sir.
And you kind of suggest the instructions that are given by virtue of the diagnosis, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the instructions you gave were how to deal with grief and depression, correct?
Yes.
Those are instructions that were given to him.
Yes, sir.
You wouldn't give those to someone who had no grief and no depression, would you?
No, sir.
You told them not to isolate themselves, to be, what the discharge recommendations are is don't isolate yourself, be around friends and family, correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's one of the things he would recommend for someone who just had a death in the family, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you also tell them in this discharge recommendation, or whatever it's called, there may be a tendency to want to overwork or become so busy that you distract yourself from the intense pain you feel, correct?
Honestly, these are pre-printed out, pre-programmed.
I understand.
So I go through and hit grief reaction and depression, and honestly, I've not fully read all of these prior to me.
Understood. But this is what Emory does when someone comes
Correct.
in and says they have the ailments that you diagnosed and then wrote prescriptions for, correct?
Correct.
And if you'll just look at page 37 of 73, bottom left of the page numbers.
Yes, sir.
Kind of the last paragraph, last sentence. There may be a tendency to want to overwork or become so busy that you distract yourself, correct?
Yes.
I think those are all the questions I have.
Mr. Abate, redirect?
Just a few questions. These are generic instructions. Did you read them to the defendant?
No, sir.
Did you watch him read them at all?
No, sir.
Do you even know if he read them?
No, sir.
Okay. And the prescription that you prescribed to the defendant, was that prescription based solely on what the defendant told you?
Based on his complaint and what I felt was medically warranted.
Okay. But he had no vital signs that...
Objection leading.
Were there any vital signs that show that he was having any physical manifestations that would go along with having an anxiety attack?
Based on review of the records, his vital signs were essentially normal.
So is that a no?
No.
No further questions.
Questions from the jurors for Dr. Rosa? Deputy Murphy, if you pull up, please. Didn't find physical signs of anxiety, the pulse rate or the panic attacks, things like that.
I felt that warranted this situation of his wife passing away in a tragic, a sudden event was worth getting low dose 4 pills in that situation.
In your time in the emergency room at Emory University Hospital, is it common to treat patients whose sole reporting situation or issue is anxiety and or depression?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. I'm trying to have you share with the jury if it's common, based on your time in the ER there at the University Hospital, to have patients whose sole diagnosis or perceived condition is I'm feeling anxious and or depressed.
Yes. So it is not an uncommon chief complaint of patients of anxiety, depression.
Mr. Abate, any follow-up to those questions?
Just one, Your Honor. You said, I believe, the reason for the prescription was because the defendant had just tragically lost his wife. Did he ever tell you during your interactions after this tragic loss or about how much he loved his wife?
I don't recall.
Did he say anything about his affection or how sorry he was for his loss?
I do not recall.
Mr. Samuel, any follow-up? No. All right. Thank you, doctor, for your time.
Thank you.
Next witness.
I think it was a oversight.
Are you right there? Hello, Mr. Shaw. Didn't know you were already here. I didn't mean to keep you waiting.
You go to raise your right hand, sir. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you should give the court today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yes, sir, if you will. Get as close to the mic as you can. For the purposes of the court's record, please state and spell your name.
My name is Anthony, middle initial O, Shaw, Anthony, middle initial O, last name SHAW.
All right. Before we go any further, are we okay? We need to have a sidebar. Have Mr. Shaw step outside.
No, we just need a minute to get the report with the change of witnesses. We're just getting
I fully understand.
We'll be ready in 45 seconds.
Okay. Please be patient. I'm guessing you've been patient for the last many hours.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Maintain your patience.
Good afternoon, Officer Shaw. How are you?
All right, how you doing?
All right. If you could, please introduce yourself to the jury.
How you doing? I'm Officer Anthony Shaw. Good to see you guys.
And speak up just a little bit for me.
Okay.
Where are you currently employed?
Emory University Hospital.
And what do you do at Emory?
I'm a hospital security officer.
And which Emory campus are you assigned to?
The main campus, University Hospital.
Where is that located?
That's 1364 Clifton Road.
Okay. And how long have you been a public safety officer at Emory?
For approximately 10 years.
Okay. And what type of work did you do before you were a public safety officer?
Before I joined Emory, I was a juvenile probation officer with Fulton Juvenile Court. And before that, I was a juvenile detention officer for Fulton County Juvenile Court. And before that, I did a stint in the military.
Okay. And what branch of the military did you do a stint with?
The branch was U.S. Army.
Okay. And as a public safety officer at Emory, do you carry a weapon?
Yes, I do.
And what type of weapon do you carry?
It's a Glock 17 9mm.
And are you post-certified?
Oh, we're not post-certified. We're just we qualify with the weapons.
And what does post-certified mean?
That's a police officer status and training.
Okay, and you said you're certified with just the weapon?
Yes, we're not police officers.
Okay, what's the difference?
Hospital security is not required to have post-certification. That's if you're a police officer.
Okay. And if you could please explain your day-to-day activities as a public safety officer at the hospital.
Okay, on a day-to-day basis, we're responsible for a variety of roles, providing safety, security for patients, visitors, employees, family members that are on Emory University property.
Okay. And when you're at work, are you assigned to a particular area or do you work the entire hospital?
Well, we take calls from the main campus, the University Hospital. We're also responsible for the building across the street, the Emory Tower. Also, there's a building up the street, Emory Rehab Hospital, so we take calls at 3 different locations.
Okay. So if you're not on a call, where's your just normal post?
Well, my particular role right now, I'm the shift supervisor.
Okay.
So we place officers for different places for different reasons. There, we place officers in the emergency department. After 9 p.m., our guest services staff leaves, so we post officers in the front lobby. So basically, we just make sure we have officer presence throughout the building.
Okay. And what is your shift that you're the supervisor over?
It's still a 12-hour night shift, 7 p to 7 a.m.
Okay. And were you on that shift on September 25th of 2016?
Yes, I will.
And where were you assigned that night?
Well, that particular night, I didn't have any particular assignment. We just, most of the time, if the emergency room is crowded, so that's a high traffic area, there's a lot of issues that take place in the emergency department. So if the emergency room is crowded, we'll spend a concentrated amount of time there, but we're still responsible for the whole property. But that particular night, I was in the front of the building, in the lobby area.
Okay, so you were in the lobby area of the emergency department?
Of the main hospital. There's the front entrance.
Okay. And do you recall a woman coming in with a gunshot wound?
Yes.
Do you recall about what time it was?
It should have been a little after 10 p.m.
Okay.
The 2200 military time.
And in your 10 years at Emory at this location, how many gunshot wounds have you encountered there?
Over a 10-year period of time, I would say maybe 5 or 6 on my shift.
Okay. And tell the jury how you learned about the lady coming through with the gunshot wound.
Okay, while I was president valet up in the motor lobby area, a vehicle came up and they approached the valet. And many times during when you have an emergency room, people will drive up and they have different emergencies. So it's not unusual to have somebody drive up and with somebody with some type of medical issue. So you just kind of pay attention and see what's going on out there and see if the incident is something that needs our immediate attention or if they need to get the medical staff first.
Okay. So on this night, how did you find out about him coming through?
This particular night, I was in the motor lobby area inside the front of the hospital, and there was some type of commotion out front. When you see the valet people moving around, you kind of peek your head out and see what's going on. So that particular night, there was some movement out in the valet, and it seemed that somebody had an issue out in the car. But at that particular time, you don't know exactly what it is, so you kind of like pay attention, see what's going on. And then I believe at that particular time, the valet person went in and got the medical people's attention.
Okay. And when the valet person came in, you said you were near the lobby with the medical staff?
Yes.
And did you hear what he said?
I think somebody in the area said the word gunshot victim.
Okay.
I'm not sure who, but somebody.
Okay. And once you learned that someone needed help outside, what did you do?
But when we hear the word gunshot, the first thing we want to do is get the attention of the medical staff, because the medical staff are the first people that need to be alerted. Because when people come in and they have medical emergencies, it's our position that the medical staff should be the first people to encounter a patient a person that's in a car. If somebody comes in and they may have been harmed or hurt or fallen or seriously injured, the medical staff should be the first person to assist them out of the vehicle. So it wouldn't be the public safety person that would be the first person to assist the person out of the car, because we don't have the medical training.
Okay. And take a look at the screen and let me know when you see yourself in the video.
That's me standing right by the bench there.
With the styrofoam cup in your hand?
Yes.
Now explain again why you did not assist with removing the woman from the car.
At that particular time, the medical staff were present, so there wouldn't be a need for me to assist right at that particular moment, because we would like the medical staff to take the lead when it comes to assisting and putting hands on the patient, because we don't know what type of injury they may have.
Okay. And do you recall what you're doing right there?
Basically just observing, trying to figure out what the situation is.
And who is the other officer that comes?
That's the other officer on duty. That would be Officer McCall.
Okay. Now, while you're out there, do you ever hear the man in the red shirt that gets out the truck say anything?
At that particular point, I don't remember hearing him say anything.
Okay. So after you come outside and observe this, what is the next thing that you do?
The next immediate thing I would be wanting to do would contact the police, because if I've been aware of a shooting, I would need to notify the police so they could be en route as soon as possible.
And how would you notify the police?
I would notify the police normally by radio. That's the fastest way to contact Emory Police and Emory Public Safety, which is hospital security. We operate on the same radio frequency, so the fastest way to contact the police is by radio.
Okay. So your radio connects to the Emory Police Department?
Yes, we're on the same frequency.
Okay. And you did that night?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall who responded after you dispatched out to Emory Police Department?
The first officer on the scene was Officer Strobel, and also he had an additional officer, Officer Ritchie.
Okay. Do you recall what you told dispatch when you called across the radio?
It would just be a basic notification that we have a gunshot victim that just arrived on the scene, and we need police assistance to come on the scene to establish jurisdiction.
Okay. And when you say establish jurisdiction, what do you mean by that?
We need them to come and determine where the offense took place, if they can make that determination.
Okay. And after Officer Stroop arrived, did you assist him with any type of investigation?
Well, what we do is, when police arrive on the scene, we will let them basically take over the situation. We will assist in trying to help them locate individuals, because we're the first person to observe. So if anybody comes in and they have questions on who's the victim, who's the family member, sometimes people scatter and they don't have to be in the same place. So basically, we would be on the scene to assist and identify, and basically try to gather as much information as we need, because we also have to do an internal report.
Okay. And on this evening, did you take any statements from any of the people that got out of that truck?
No, I did not.
Did you collect any of the biographical information from anyone that got out of that truck?
I collected the names of the individual present, name, addresses, telephone number.
And who did you speak with?
I spoke with Mr. McIver at some point, and I spoke to a young lady who was driving. I can't remember her name, but the driver of the vehicle. I interacted with her, got her basic information, interacted with the gentleman, Mr. McIver, got his basic information. And at that point, things were moving rapidly, because the patient was one place, getting immediate medical attention. We were just on the scene trying to assist as much as possible. Once I get the information out to the police, they determine jurisdiction. They will contact the corresponding police department who needs to respond. Those people will come on site and they will take it from there.
Okay. Now, you said that you got the biographical information from the defendant, Mr. McIver.
Yes.
Did you take that information before or after Officer Stroop arrived?
I'm not really sure. At some point, because things are moving very quickly, like I said, the main thing to do is to get the police notified that you have a shooter so they can show up as soon as possible. When the police come on the scene, they need our assistance in identifying the people who came. If it was a car full of people, we would want to try to keep everybody in the same place. We wouldn't want them to scatter out. We would have everybody sit in a certain location. We could point out to the officers that the officer, when he arrives, who are the people that are involved in the incident. So after we make that determination, we basically just stand back and let the process go forward. And at some point, I would have to interview the people involved, just get some basic information for a summary report.
Okay. And when you were getting the information from the defendant and the young lady that he was with, could you describe her?
White female, casually dressed. I think she had on some type of a hat.
Okay.
At that time.
And when you were talking to them to get the biographical information, were they together?
At some point when they came in, I think the young lady sat up front in the waiting area, and the patient was taken to a trauma room. So initially, both persons may have been standing right outside the trauma room. But at the same time, while this incident is going on, I also have the cell phone that responds to all the other calls in the hospital. So there were other issues going on at the time. So we had this issue going on, and somebody may be calling me for the regular course of business. So between answering the phone and taking regular calls, I would go back and forth and continue to assist with this situation.
Okay. During the night, do you see any other officers from any other agencies other than Emory Police Department arrive at the hospital?
At some point, Emory Police contacted Atlanta Police after they determined Atlanta to be the jurisdiction of the incident. So at some point, an APD officer did arrive. I do remember the officer. I don't remember his name, but I'm sure at some point it was my job to identify him by getting his name and information. If nothing else but the name and badge number. So I would get in contact with the officer, find out his name and badge number, so it will be listed in my report.
Okay. And if I show you a copy of your report, would that help refresh your recollection as to who the APD officer was?
Yes, it would. Okay, public safety, the name. Atlanta Police Detectives, Rickard.
And who else came with Officer Rickard?
And Robeson.
Okay. And so officers Ricker and Robeson arrived from Atlanta Police Department.
Yes.
And once they arrived, did you assist them with any type of interviews?
No.
That night, did you speak to any of the nurses about anything they heard or saw?
No.
Did you observe Officer Stroop or anybody from the Atlanta Police Department speaking with the nurses?
Officer Stroop possibly spoke with nurses. As I said, things were moving quickly. The family members went from the trauma room to there's a family waiting area at some point while the medical process was going on, trying to assist the victim. The gentleman moved over to a different room. It's like a patient family waiting area. So at some point he moved to the patient waiting area. There were many people involved. The whole ED unit was kind of collapsing and assisting with that situation. So it was real chaotic. So basically I was just there to kind of like keep an eye on the situation. And at some point, Officer Stroop, made the suggestion that we need to separate the parties.
Okay, and when you say separate the parties, which parties are you talking about?
We're talking about the two individuals that came in the vehicle, Mr. McIver, and I can't think of the lady's name.
Okay.
But she was driving the vehicle.
Okay. Let me show you your police report again. Let me know if looking at this refreshes your name into the woman that came with him.
It's Miss Patricia Carter.
Okay. And did he tell you why he thought they needed to be separated?
He just said they needed to be separated.
Okay, and did you separate them?
Yes, with the assistance of my coworker, Officer McCall. The lady was escorted to one part of the waiting area towards the front, the ED waiting area, and Mr. McIver stayed toward the back near a different waiting area.
And when you separated them, what area were they in together? Where did you move them from when you separated them? Where did you see them at?
It was probably the trauma area,
Okay.
the first initial room that the patient was in.
Okay. And did you ever learn if Ms. McIver survived the gunshot wound?
Yes.
And do you recall around what time you learned that she had passed?
My memory serves me correct. I think it was around towards 1 a.m. because at some point the victim was moved from the trauma room up to surgery. That's our third floor A wing. So at some point, Mr. McIver was escorted up to the third floor in the normal surgical waiting area. So there were many people assisting him. We had a chaplain on duty. She was present, assisting. And at some point, I believe the chaplain informed me that the patient didn't make it.
Okay. And so after Ms. McIver passed, did you have any interactions with, what happened after that?
Well, after that, as I said, everything's still going on in process. While my phone is still ringing with regular hospital business, so there are times where I had to go take care of calls, make contact with other people on duty. There's a nursing supervisor that had to be updated about the situation. So at some point, the doctors would have had to inform Mr. McIver that his wife had passed.
And while you were there, and you talked about separating Ms. Patricia Carter from the defendant, did you ever meet his attorney, Steve Maples?
Yes.
And when did you meet him?
I can't say specifically how much time had passed between the time Mr. McIver first came into the ED, but at some point while we were still downstairs and they were still working on Ms. McIver in the trauma room, a gentleman did appear and he stood next to Mr. McIver. Mr. McIver introduced him as a friend of his, attorney, so-and-so.
And this is while she was still in the trauma room?
While she was still in the trauma room.
And did you assist with the removal of Ms. McIver from the hospital?
Yes.
Okay. And what was your involvement in that process?
The normal process of moving in to see from the hospital is the funeral people who come down, removal people who come down. They will come down to our loading dock area. They will pick up a phone out on the loading dock that would announce that they're there. We will go down, meet them at the loading dock, bring them up to lab customer service to sign out all the necessary paperwork. They would have to verify that they are the correct people to pick up the deceased. They have to verify that they're the correct funeral home sent by the correct person. Once we verify the paperwork in our lab customer service department on the first floor and everything is verified that the correct people are coming to pick up the body, then we will escort those people from lab customer service up to the actual location of the victim.
Okay. And which agency removed Ms. McIver from the hospital?
The gentlemen that arrived at night, they were from the CAB, the medical office, examiner's office, I believe.
Remember which county?
I'm sorry, Fulton.
Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office. Okay, and did you create a report?
Yes.
And did that end your involvement in the investigation of this case?
Yes.
No other questions?
Ms. Clark Palmer,
Hello, good afternoon.
good to hear from you.
Yes, I'm still here. Unlike Mr. Harvey. I'm
We want
He's coming back. Good afternoon. Is it Officer Shaw?
Yes, sir.
Is that the appropriate title?
Yes, it is.
Okay, my name's Amanda Clark Palmer.
How you doing?
How are you?
All right.
Okay. I have just a few questions to make sure I understood what you told us in your direct testimony. And I want to back the video up a little bit. Without watching this whole thing again, the valet workers go up with the wheelchair up to the car, and it's while they are getting Mrs. McIver out of the car that you first come out, correct? Or you come out when the nurses come out.
Right.
Do you want to go back and I can play?
No, I see you.
Okay.
Can you touch the screen? If you touch it gently with your fingertip, it should make a mark. Can you point where you are on the screen?
Or like draw a circle around or something?
Yeah.
That would work. Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Cool. All right, thank you. Okay, so before you walked outside, could you hear what was being said outside?
If anything was being said, I could hear from right there, yes.
But before you walked, when you were still inside, before you came out with the nurses,
Right.
could you hear what was going on outside? No. Okay. All right. So if there was some communication outside about gunshot or I need help, if that communication happened before you walked outside, you would not have heard it.
No.
Okay. I'm with you. But did you hear the word gunshot, or is that what prompted you to come outside?
What prompted me to come outside was
The commotion. Okay.
When the valet are moving around,
Okay.
people come into the valet all the time for different reasons.
Right.
Sometimes it's for minor situations, sometimes it's for more serious situations, sometimes people just need assistance getting out of the car.
Okay.
Sometimes people will say that situations are serious and that people rush out and they don't turn out to be as serious as they first thought.
Okay. So you just, the commotion kind of caught your eye and you thought, let me go see what's, because that's your job.
Right.
Okay. You got the names and phone numbers and addresses of people who were with Mrs. McIver, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I missed, when did you get that information from the driver, for example, from Danny Jo, or that's not her, Mrs. Carter, her name's not, her legal name's not Danny Jo, correct? That's not the name you wrote down on your report.
Legal name?
Let me start over. You got the information, you got the name, phone number, and address for the woman who was driving the car.
Yes, I did.
Okay. When did you get her name, address, and phone number in relation to when Mrs. McIver got to the ER? Was it like within the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
No, that wouldn't be a priority.
Okay.
At some point, a report needs to be generated. So sometime before the people leave and the situation calms down and everybody's in place where I can find them, I know before the people leave, I need to get certain information to generate a basic report. So at some point before she left, I would have had to have an interaction with her to get that basic information.
Do you have any way to remember if it was when Diane McIver was still down in the emergency room department?
I'm thinking that it probably was.
Okay.
Because the situation that was going on, there were a lot of people in the room assisting with the victim, and the people who came with the victim were basically waiting to see the outcome of all the medical attention. So I wouldn't want to get into asking for information right then. So it's after a certain period of time, at some point after the person probably left the trauma room, and it may have been even when the patient was taken up to begin surgery.
Okay.
So once everybody's in place and know where everybody is and things are kind of settled down, then I can go back and get the basic information, the name, the telephone numbers.
When you got that basic information, did you get it on the first floor in the emergency room, or did you get it up on the third floor?
The first floor.
Okay. And when you got that basic information, did the woman tell you that she was the driver of the car?
I believe she did.
All right. And at the time you got that information from her, did you also get Mr. McIver's name and address and phone number?
Yes.
Okay.
But it wasn't at the same time. It was the information between them was separate.
They were separated. Mr.
Right.
McIver and the driver of the vehicle were separated.
Right.
Okay. But in the same, when I say at the same time, I just mean it wasn't hours later that you went and got Mr. McIver's name, address, and phone number.
No.
Okay. Speaking of phone numbers, do you know the phone number to the Emory Police Department?
It's 447-27-8005.
Okay. 404-727-8005.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Okay, and then later on, you met somebody named Steve Maples.
Yes.
Did you get his name, Steve Maples, right there in the that day, or later on you found out his name was Steve Maples?
No, I got his information while Mr. McIver was standing in front of the patient's visitor's room.
Okay.
It's around by the ambulance bay side.
Okay.
Near room 11.
So they're still on the first floor when you collect.
Still on the
this?
first floor, still in the emergency department.
Okay. And it's your memory that Mrs. McIver was still downstairs in the emergency room when Steve Maples was there?
Yes, somewhere in the area. She may have been further up front in the ED waiting area.
Okay.
But around the corners towards the exit of the ambulance bay, there's a patient's visitor's room back there also.
Okay.
So Mr. McIver and Mr. Maples were around by that area, while Ms. Carter was around the front in the ED front waiting area.
Oh, okay. My question is though, when Mr. Maples was there, when you were introduced to Mr. Maples, Diane McIver, was she still being treated in
She was still being treated.
in the emergency room?
Yes.
Not up on the third floor in surgery?
Not doing my recollection.
Okay. And you were introduced to Steve Maples, that he was Mr. McIver's friend?
He introduced the gentleman as my friend, attorney.
Okay, so kind of all in the same sentence. This is my friend.
My friend, attorney.
Steve Maples was how he was introduced to you. Okay. Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Ms. Griffin, any follow-up?
No other questions.
Any questions for Officer Shaw from the jury? At the vehicle, inspect the vehicle that Ms. McIver, Mr. McIver, and Ms. Carter arrived in there at the hospital?
No.
Did you ever direct anyone to do that?
No.
You mentioned that the other law enforcement agency, you called Emory Police.
Yes.
Ultimately, Atlanta Police Department was called. Do you know why it was that the city of Atlanta Police was called instead of some other jurisdiction?
Oh, it's my understanding that based on whatever the location of the incident was, when we call EPD, Emory Police, is to have their dispatcher determine the area that the jurisdiction falls in.
Okay, it wasn't your decision?
It was not decision.
Okay. You described how Mr. McIver and Ms. Carter were separated at some point. Was that your decision to do that, or did someone request that you separate them?
That was the decision of EPD Officer Stroop.
Okay. And you were following his request?
Yes.
Did you also separate Mr. Maples, my friend Attorney Maples? Was he separated from Ms. Carter and Mr. McIver?
No.
All right. Any follow-up to that, Ms. Griffin?
Just the last question. When you separated Ms. Carter and Mr. McIver, was Mr. Maples present?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
If I show you the report, would that refresh your recollection?
As far as
Whether or not he was present?
she was separated before.
Can you say that? So Officer Shaw, you've had a chance to review your report. Why don't you ask your question again, Ms. Griffin, to see if his recollection is refreshed.
Okay, Officer Shaw, do you recall if Mr. Maples was present when you separated Ms. Carter and the defendant?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And did he remain with the defendant after you took Ms. Carter away?
He remained with the defendant.
No other questions.
Ms. Clark Hall? All right. Thank you, Officer Shaw. You have a great weekend. Where you go?
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached that witching hour, 5:30 something on a Friday. I'm going to send you guys home in a minute. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Rucker, but it's my understanding that there's only one more witness to talk about Emory and what was going on there. We were trying to close that chapter tonight and send you home saying new chapter starting Monday, but we didn't quite get there. Did I miscount? Is it one more or two more, your forecast?
No more than that. But we'll talk about it this weekend. I'm expecting one, though.
Okay.
One more.
One or two more witnesses to talk to you all about what happened or didn't happen at the Emory University Hospital in the state's presentation. And then I'm told we'll be moving to another chapter in this matter. And we'll see where that takes us. This will be our first extended time apart from each other. Since you were sworn in as jurors longer than just one evening, you'll have some daylight hours to yourself as well. I suspect you guys aren't going to be spending time together, but should you bump into each other, don't talk about the case because it would be too soon to begin your deliberations. More importantly, as you are relaxing or going to your regular job over the weekend, please stay away from information about the case and resist calling a therapist to say, I'm going to tell you what's going on, because your therapist could say, hey, here's what I've read about the case, and that's not helpful at this point. Ms. Harris, I have a question for you. So in a minute, you're welcome to take your fingers off the steno machine, but the question is about how we're maintaining the exhibits. They move around some because the parties use them when they're examining witnesses. But I want to make sure we are not burdening Ms. Harris with the obligation of making sure everything is there, but typically evidence stays with the court reporter while the case, things other than guns, but all this paper and whatnot, ought to stay with Ms. Harris. Ms. Harris, do you have any preferences to how we work through this? We're off the record now. Okay, so you feel like you're being taken care of?
Yes, I'm okay. Sir.
Okay. Back on the record. So I'm just noticing there's a mess of exhibits there, but I'm hearing that folks are supporting Ms. Harris and working through that. Number two, I'd like to know Monday morning what the plan is with Mr. McIver, Mr. Maple, and Mr. Leipold's statement to APD. If there's an agreement, if there's not an agreement, then I want to mediate that disagreement so that when we get to the part of the state's presentation where they're going to want to play some or all of it, we will have resolved that in advance. And I shared with you what I think is playable, and I'm ready for feedback from the two sides. Finally, reminder, jury charges sometime Monday to Ms. Lyons. You got all weekend to work on those 2 or 3, you called them home-cooked jury charges. That was your phrase. So, anything from the state before we break for the weekend?
I know that Mr. Samuel just approached me, Judge, about talking about logistics in terms of the court intending to go a little bit later to, allow us to squeeze more in so that certainly when the defense case is presented, they are not all of a sudden having to go a whole lot longer than the state is required to go. And so, my expectation is that we've gotten through in this shortened week about 28 witnesses.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. I expect that, once we get through a certain portion of the story, it will pick up, perhaps even more. And so right now, we're really pushing to finish, the middle of, or early in the week of the 26th.
Okay.
I don't know that we'll accomplish it, but we're going to certainly strive to do it.
I'll keep pushing too. And we may talk with the jurors, assuming they can continue to give us a half hour or more extra during the days, whether we need to grab part of a weekend day too. Because what's not going to happen is we reach a point and it's the defense's opportunity if we get to a defense case, and then in any way should they feel time constraints. They have as much time as they need to put on what they want to put on. Their witness list right now isn't very long, but some of those witnesses would likely take a while. And then, of course, there are rebuttal witnesses that have already been identified. So all that needs to fit in. It's just a question of whether everyone's comfortable with continuance in the middle, a longer break, and we'd certainly have to get input from the jurors. A number of them said, I'm good through March, but you're making me nervous about that first week of April. So you all are aware of what's going on out there, and I trust you're working hard to move things along. But I appreciate that you guys are coordinating on that.
Yeah, and also, Judge, I want to flag for your radar, and we carve out perhaps some time to elicit arguments on the Skype issue.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a very long argument, but
you might find a very compelling argument on our side.
Okay.
Supported by law, so.
Those are the best kinds of arguments.
Absolutely. If we got to treat with a law, it'll be more efficient.
I think so too. Hopefully it won't be the surprise case from Kentucky that they think is going to carry the day. You guys can confer about that. I'm happy to make time either after court one of the days, early next week. What is maybe at lunch on Tuesday too. We'll see. But you just want to flag it. Okay. So it hasn't gone away, is what you're saying. Right. All right. Rule 9.2C.
Death to the rule. Death to the rule.
Mr. Samuel, same question for the defense. Anything we need to work through?
It's really the same issue, and I think you were just saying what was on my mind. I'm worried about them saying, we're not going to finish next week, it sounds like for sure, the state's case. And, we're starting Tuesday or Wednesday the following week, and we're told you got 48 hours. And not only that, but we're going to work till midnight during your case, whereas we quit at 5 o'clock and there's, you know what it's like.
Sure.
Always a defense case that ends up we're going to work weekends, If that looks like it's going to happen, they ought to start, for example, next weekend, their case.
I agree.
And you said something about taking a break. That's fine with us, obviously. You envision it's possible that we would go until Friday the 31st, which, by the way, is Passover.
So Friday's the 30th, but we would be mindful of any need that people, jurors, attorneys, witnesses have to be elsewhere.
Just be just quit early that day. You can work that day, me and the one juror, I think. Maybe.
Good Friday.
It's Good Friday, too. Okay. I don't know what you have to do, but...
Well, we would get a different court reporter if we needed to.
I'm just asking you, bear in mind, perhaps putting it 3 or 4 o'clock.
Sure.
And is it your view that maybe we would take a week off and then come back and continue if we needed to do closing arguments, deliberations?
We'd have to see what can happen with the jurors. We need to keep 12 alive. So I don't know. And so my thought is we're going to take this incrementally. And so if by the middle of next week, it's looking still to the state like they're going to spill pretty deep into the following week, then we need to see what we can get done, not this weekend, but next weekend, in terms of getting some court time. And it might be reduced hours, it might be 10 to 4 or something, but it's still, let's get a good chunk of time during which we can advance this process. The veto ultimately comes from the jurors. If they say, no, we can commit to some time in April, then we know that we just will likely take a break in early April and then reconvene wherever we happen to be. It sounds like it would be in the midst of the defense presentation, or perhaps the way it would break is it's jury charge, closing arguments, reversed when we come back. So I'm going to try to keep pushing things along and then we'll be flexible.
It sounds like you're sensitive to our concerns. That's all we ask.
I think they're shared concerns. All right. Then everyone have a great weekend. 9 a.m. Monday.